I would now like to welcome onto the stage I'd like to talk a little bit about our partners, if I may. Firstly, our platinum partners who have really helped us out. So we've got AGL, we've got the state government through the Office of Offshore Wind have been terrific. We've got AGL, as I've mentioned, who have been sponsoring the youth conference. And indeed, I'd also like to mention Iberdrola, who've taken over the precinct over there and also ensured that we have sustainability of this space by offsetting the environmental benefits, providing us with environmental offsets. Thank you, Iberdrola. Also our gold sponsors as well. I'd like to thank all of them, and our silver and our expo holders. So the gold sponsors I should just mention, I haven't got my list, so let's hope I get them right. Southerly 10, formerly known as Star of the South, who are doing our sustainability. Ocean Winds, of course, were involved, who's been here at our signs. We've got Gippsland Skies, who did the breakfast this morning in the expo hall. We've got Corio Generation, who's doing the coffee carts and so on like that. Good on them. And of course, last night BlueFloat did a fantastic job as well with the dinner. Just the networking last night was terrific. Thank you also to our silver sponsors and everything. We really appreciate those. I think that just about brings us to all my thank yous, and I'd like to now welcome, this year of course we thank La Trobe for being our host, but really the conference has begun through our close collaboration with the Wellington Shire, who have been absolutely terrific in bringing renewable energy to the forefront. Can I welcome now onto the stage, and can we give a huge welcome to the Mayor of the Wellington Shire, Councillor Ian Bye.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the warm welcomes. Everyone be pleased to know I've gave Hamish a pat backstage. I know Darren doesn't get along with dogs, but Hamish is okay. On behalf of the Wellington Shire, it's my privilege to be here today with you all at this year's New Energy Conference. Congratulations on a spectacular day one yesterday. It was well received by everyone. 22 months ago, I received a call from Minister Bowen to meet him at the Sea Spray Surf Lifesaving Club. On a windy day, of course, for the Minister to announce that our region was the first declared offshore wind zone in Australia. It does seem like such a long time ago, 22 months ago. As we come together today, I can't help but feel a deep sense of pride, not just in what we have achieved, but what we continue to strive for as we lead the way in renewable energy for Gippsland. This year marks the third consecutive year that Wellington Shire has joined as a key partner, and we are very proud to have been a catalyst in bringing this fantastic conference to life. We had the privilege of hosting this event at the Wedge Performing Arts Centre in Sale the past 2 years, and it's been wonderful to see the event grow and expand across Gippsland this year. I want to start by acknowledging the event sponsors and the Gippsland Climate Change Network, led by, of course, Darren McCubbin. Thank you for all the hard work that's gone on behind the scenes to make this event possible by a great team. So I think a round of applause for that team for bringing the conference to us. A special welcome to the Honourable Chris Bowen, Minister of Climate Change and Energy, who is with us today, will present shortly. It's been a pleasure working alongside Mr Bowen since the Gippsland was announced as Australia's first offshore wind region. I'm looking forward to hearing your address shortly. Welcome also to Senator Jess Walsh. It's nice to see her back in Gippsland. To my fellow mayors and councillors, industry leaders, CEOs and all attendees, some of which have travelled from across the globe, I extend a warm welcome and thank you for coming. You have arrived in a region that is not just beautiful, but also at the forefront of global change in renewable energy. As I stand here today, marking my last appearance at this conference as Mayor of Wellington Shire, I'm filled with great sense of pride. Over the past few years, we've been on an incredible journey, a journey driven by vision, persistence, and a deep commitment to renewable energy. We have led the way and taken on the challenge and embraced it with enthusiasm and purpose. We have worked hard to provide certainty for our communities, making sure that the foundations we are laying now will support a thriving, sustainable future. The progress in offshore energy is particularly worth noting. What were just a few ideas a few years ago are now on the brink of becoming reality. But let me be clear, our work isn't done yet. The momentum we have built must not be only sustained but accelerated. It is evident that the future we want Gippsland is a future powered by renewable energy, and that demands ongoing dedication. So I'm really excited to see what will come out of this year's conference. Addressing climate change has been a key priority for Wellington Shire Council over the past 4 years and is number one in our council plan. A significant part of this has been the focus on attracting new investments to our region and steering our local communities towards a sustainable renewable energy future. Wellington Shire Council has been a leader in this space, particularly with our renewable energy impact and readiness study that was released early last year. The groundbreaking study highlights our commitment, welcoming over $40 billion in planned renewable energy investment to our region. Our collaboration and advocacy efforts with South Gippsland Shire have been equally as important. Together and in partnership with Gunai Kurnai Land and Waters Aboriginal Corporation, we've submitted a joint funding application to the Commonwealth Government's $400 million Regional Precincts and Partnerships Program to enable us to actively work on land and infrastructure plans for Yarram, Foster and surrounding areas of Barry Beach Port. The need to get this land and infrastructure plan right, especially with the recent declaration of offshore wind licences from the Commonwealth Government, cannot be overstated. We need to make sure that the planning and infrastructure is done right in order to be prepared and ready to entice over 1,000 workers with their families to a maintenance hub located at Barry Beach. If we don't get this right now, the industry will struggle to establish itself in time, and our region will miss out on maximising the incredible investment. The renewable energy sector in Gippsland is moving faster than ever, and we're just at the start, but it's starting to feel real. As a wrap-up, as my time as Mayor of Wellington, I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who has been part of this journey so far. Together, we have laid the groundwork for a brighter, more sustainable future for Gippsland, and I'm confident that this journey will continue even greater success in the years to come. Thank you for your time. Have a great day too at the conference. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ian. Much appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so sorry. Everyone, thank you very much for being here today. I should have recognised yesterday that we did have a significant event in renewable energy over the last 12 months, and that, of course, is the permits were finally allowed for the Delburn wind farm. And we acknowledge the fact that onshore wind is part of the solution that we need to make ourselves truly renewable, and fantastic work for Delburn to work so hard over the last umpteen years, working with the community and so on to develop this operation, which will start shortly. I'd like to show a short film which is showing how Delburn has been moving into the community. Thank you.
Delburn Wind Farm is Australia's most advanced plantation-based wind farm.
This project is unique that it will generate wind power at different times from the wind power in Western Victoria, and it's located close to the existing transmission network.
My name's Liz Radcliffe. I'm the Director of Operations and Compliance at AUSME Australia, and I live in Murby North. AUSME and Cubico are the team behind the Delburn Wind Farm, and we're looking forward to starting construction in 2025. The project is going to bring 200 new jobs to the Latrobe Valley and the Gippsland region. It's great to be able to continue the Latrobe Valley's proud history of energy generation and skill people up in new renewable energy.
I'm Peter, an Executive Director at AUSME Australia. I grew up in South Gippsland and continue to support my family's grazing business here. When we discovered this site, we could see that it offered a diverse wind resource for Gippsland. By harnessing the power here, it will generate clean energy, reduce carbon emissions, and help Victoria's transition to a low carbon emissions future.
My name is Anne Forbes. I'm the Communications and Engagement Manager at AUSME Australia. I'm very proud to be part of the team because we're doing something that's very positive for the future of Gippsland. We're committed to working with the near neighbours and the community groups, First Nations and stakeholders on this important project. I really love the fact that the wind farm's already giving back to a local community and helping to deliver a new energy legacy for the Gippsland area.
My name's Alex Gaddes. I'm Head of Development Australia for Cubico Sustainable Investments. I'm very excited about this project in Gippsland, near where I grew up in Victoria. We're committed to working closely with the community and stakeholders to build positive relationships, maximise local procurement opportunities and deliver a best practice community benefits scheme.
Keep up to date by visiting delburnwindfarm.au or by following us on our Facebook page. We're really excited to be kicking off the new energy transition in the Latrobe Valley and helping to build a sustainable energy future for Gippsland. We look forward to working with you as we harness the power of wind.
Thank you. We are proud to say that we've been showcasing the very best of Gippsland. And of course, one of the things that you can be is a hero for net zero. And if you are, and you're given a little token, you can replace that with a bottle of wine or a fabulous book by Andy McCarthy. But let's talk a little bit about the food. Last night, or yesterday, we had some terrific Gippsland produce, and also last night. We are very proud in Gippsland of our farming tradition, of the agriculture that really drives our community. And we have tried as much as we possibly can to showcase fantastic Gippsland produce within this conference. I'd like now to explain that further, I'd like to invite onto the stage the CEO of Food and Fibre Gippsland, Ben Gebert.
Thank you, Darren.
No worries.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much, Darren. One thing that I don't do well is I don't stand at lecterns very well and I don't read notes very well. But I have taken a couple for you today because I want to showcase some of the really top-notch produce that you've all partaken in over the last couple of days. Based on us not having a full auditorium this morning, some may have over-imbibed last night with the cocktails, but I'm not sure. I couldn't make it because I was at home producing food on the farm. But Darren, very kind introduction, thank you. One thing that Gippsland is known even better for, as a cheeky comment from me, than our energy production credentials, is our food and fibre industry. And the food and fibre industry in this region produces, as a whole of sector, whole of value chain, produces roughly $7 billion worth of product, contributes just under half of our gross regional product, and is the largest employment sector in the region. We're really proud of that, and Gippsland as a region produces nearly everything. We have, as you've heard, I've heard presenters speak about Gippsland as being the size of Switzerland. We have a strategic partnership with the Danish Trade Council and also with the Netherlands, and Gippsland is also roughly the size of the Netherlands and Denmark. It's a large geographical footprint, and we produce a lot of different produce. Roughly 23% of the nation's dairy produce comes from Gippsland. We have a really strong history in dairy production. Roughly 25% of the nation's beef by value comes from Gippsland, have a really high value beef industry here. Red meat's a big one. We've got our sheep industry as well, which also produces fibre. But the thing about Gippsland that probably makes it really special is that whole of supply chain. We grow a lot of the produce here, and increasingly we're working on processing more of that produce here and ensuring that that value is captured for our local community, and so that Gippslanders, as well as many of you who've come from further afield, can access produce and top-notch product that's been grown here, processed here, and sent off to different markets all over the place. Bit of a showcase on some of the businesses whose products you've been enjoying over the last couple of days, and a big thanks to Bree Tominski and the team at the Polly Baker who've been catering this event thus far. Top-notch catering in my personal opinion, and they're really committed to utilising those local products as well. So Gippsland Jersey, local dairy company, was founded by a couple of outstanding individuals who wish to make a difference in the dairy industry as a small processor, focus on farmer mental health. They've won the best full cream milk in Australia. Their volumes are nowhere near the big producers, but they pack a punch and well above their weight. You've been eating their creme fraiche, their full cream milk, and also some of their other products here, butter and the like. We've had beautiful smoked trout from the Alpine Trout Farm at New G. And if anybody wants to list down names of places to visit, I encourage you to do so because, as I've said, we've got a large region and a lot of great places to visit. The Paynesville Pantry into the east, a lot of the sauces and the chutneys and the other beautiful preserves that you've had as a part of your meal have come from the Paynesville Pantry. Small team, top-notch product. Flooding Creek Fungi in Sale, one of my favourite businesses. Amazing business model. In a small rural town, if I order my mushrooms from Joseph and the team at Flooding Creek Fungi, and I'm not sure if they're still doing it, but last time I ordered mushrooms, they would be delivered within the hour to my front door, direct from their production facility. Pretty awesome as far as I'm concerned. Bulmus Greens in the Lindenow Valley, about 100 odd k's from here to the east. The Lindenow Valley is one of our most high production horticulture areas in the country. Phenomenal amount of salad greens and leafy greens come out of that area. The Bulmers Farm team operate a business that supplies pretty much all of the eastern seaboard McDonald's with a lot of their salad, as do some of the other growers there. And you've been enjoying the fresh leafy greens from that rich alluvial valley in the Lindenow area. Highly encourage a visit, very picturesque, beautiful day today, probably too nice to be sitting inside frankly, but here we are. A lot of the produce has come through Manny's Market. John Askew and the team here in the valley and more broadly operate Manny's Market. Absolute champion business, long established family business that provides fresh produce, but also real champions for sustainability and thinking outside of the box. John supplies a lot of cafes, takes back the food waste, dehydrates it, turns it into compost, and then supplies it back to the market gardens to grow the vegetables and greens on that product again. So if you want to look into that, that's Manny's Market. If you did choose to have a crack at some of the cocktails and wines, if you've been a climate hero, I'm not exactly sure what the hero for zero. If you've got your token and you've chosen not to take Andy McCarthy's book, you'll get a bottle of Blue Gables wine, beautiful, beautiful wine from Maffra West Upper. We've had Goodland Beer, born right here in Traralgon, brewed right here, another great family story. They've won a whole heap of awards for their product, and one of my favourites, it's very viscous. It's like a milkshake in a glass or a thick shake in a glass. Do recommend. Glengarry Cider from Glengarry. Currajung Estate at Willung South have also provided wine, and you may have enjoyed some of that last night, as have Narcoogee Winery at Glengarry North. And then also for those partaking in non-alcoholic beverages, there's the Etch Beverages, which stands for Every Time Choose Health. And Jason and the team make a really top-notch sparkling drink with a lot of local Indigenous and First Nations traditional foods. Jason started that business to provide a really delicious non-alcoholic alternative, and I fill it with gin. So I know he doesn't begrudge me too much for it, but also recommend that if you get the chance. Thank you very much for visiting Gippsland. We really hope that you have enjoyed the culinary delights and hope that for the locals, you already know what I'm talking about. I'm hoping I'm preaching to the converted. To those who've come to visit, we hope to see you back here for a bit longer, and please don't hesitate to seek out Gippsland produce. If you are disappointed with any Gippsland produce, I'd love to hear from you. You'd probably be the first person to express your disappointment to me, and I speak to a lot of people on a lot of occasions. So thank you very much. Really appreciate you coming along and hope you enjoy being here in our beautiful part of the world and enjoying our produce.
Yeah, thank you. We're very, very proud of our Gippsland produce. It is terrific, and I've clearly enjoyed a bit much of it. But anyway, let's move on. I just might also recognise that this afternoon from 4 o'clock we're opening the conference up to the community. That is, people can just come and see the expo stalls and participate in what's going on. That doesn't mean it's closed to the delegates. We want you to enjoy it as well. But we think the reason why this conference works is because it's a connection between the industry and the community, and we're inviting them to come along at 4 o'clock. And of course, at the end of the day, we're showing that fabulous film, Planet Wind, which I know some of you have seen, some of you haven't seen. You do need a ticket for it, but the tickets are free. You get them at the coffee shop near the little theatre at the end of the day so that we know how many people are in the room and we can ensure that that's safe. But please stick around for Planet Wind at the end of the day. Otherwise, of course, it's the youth event, the Youth Summit tomorrow. Many of the expo stall holders will be there tomorrow. It's not an open event. We do have child-safe guidelines. If you're connected with the expo or one of those, then you're fine, but you can't just roll in off the streets. So anyway, that will be going on tomorrow, and of course the community event happening this afternoon. But please, 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 please stick around. We'd love to see you until the end of the day. Moving right along, and I'm a little bit behind time, I'd now like to welcome to the stage the first of our keynote speakers today, and that is we're inviting out to the head of the Net Zero Industries Division in the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water. Can you please make welcome Shing Gaddes.
Thanks, Darren. I think we'll all agree you'll struggle to find an MC with more energy and more enthusiasm than Darren. What a guy. So thanks everyone for inviting me to the Gippsland New Energy Conference. My team and I have had a really memorable time here. It's a real honour to be speaking to you today about what the Commonwealth's doing to realise the benefits of renewable energy, and in particular offshore wind in the Gippsland region. I'd like to thank the organisers and the organisations that are working so hard in the Gippsland region to really give this industry a chance to succeed. This conference now in its third year, as we heard yesterday, it's really growing strongly, and that's a measure of the successful work that's all being undertaken in the region. Thanks also to Auntie Katherine for a wonderful welcome to country yesterday. It's really important to highlight that Australia's First Nations people are central to the Australian Government's vision and ambitions for a clean energy future. Before I kick off, I'd also like to acknowledge the peoples of the Gunai Nation, which we meet on today. I recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture and pay my respect to their elders past, present. I'd also like to pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today, and a special mention to Daniel Miller, the CEO of GLaWAC. Daniel's been a really good partner to offshore wind. His constituents have been really, really forward-leaning and recognise the opportunities that the energy transition can bring to the region. They've been proactively engaging with licence holders, and it's a wonderful example of why this region is leading when it comes to offshore wind and including in First Nations engagement. It's not really up for debate. Australia's transitioning to a renewable energy system. We need to provide cheaper, cleaner and reliable energy. We've got ambitious targets, 82% renewable electricity by 2030 and net zero emissions by 2050. Offshore wind will be a fundamental factor in that energy transition. It will support emissions reduction as well as ensure a future energy security for the nation. It will lead to economic prosperity, regional development. Gippsland's a key region in Australia in the energy transition and is leading on many fronts. Not just in having some of the best physical conditions, it's windy, we saw that recently, but more significantly, the community here has really embraced the energy transition, and that's critically important. Minister Bowen, who will be on shortly, so I won't speak too much for him, he's laid out an ambitious agenda to transition our economy. This includes establishing and growing an offshore wind industry in a very short period of time. He often talks about we're behind and we need to catch up. In my role, I'm privileged to lead a team of really dedicated public servants that are working with industry to achieve just that. We're very close to landing the last of the 6 national priority offshore wind areas. The Minister declared the 5th one in Bunbury this week. You could press him on when he's going to declare the Bass Strait announcement later. Actually, don't do that. We're working to get that done before the end of the year. So we're now moving to progressing through the grant of feasibility licences in each of the declared areas. It's a significant achievement, and it's bringing us closer to establishing Australia's offshore wind industry across Australia, with Gippsland leading the charge. The challenge for us all now is turning the momentum we've created into tangible outcomes that also benefit communities. And I've heard that a lot this week. The offshore wind industry has the potential to fast-track jobs, economic development opportunities for regional Australia, particularly in clean energy generation and green manufacturing. And you will have heard a lot from the Commonwealth Government about the Future Made in Australia policy, which is being rolled out. Green manufacturing is a key to that, and a plug for green hydrogen, which is another one of my sectors that I'm working on. So my role, as I said, supported by the dedicated team, is to support industry to start and grow in a sustainable way, to develop the necessary regulations and guidance and provide conditions for a rapid expanding sector. So not just in terms of the zones, but in terms of the Gippsland offshore wind zone, which you've heard about in the last day or so, there were a few key messages I heard yesterday. Gippsland's Australia's first dedicated declared offshore wind area. It's got the first feasibility licence and it has the first mover advantage. Minister Bowen was clear when he announced the 12 feasibility licences earlier this year that he really considered local content and benefit and national interest when he did that, and he awarded feasibility licences to the projects that would bring the most rewards for Gippsland, its workforce and our energy security. So these licence holders, they're the leaders in offshore wind around the world. They recognise the potential in the Gippsland region. This is the beginning of an industry right here in Gippsland. These companies, many of whom have been engaging in Gippsland for quite some time now, have achieved a lot in a short time. Clearly, the level of global interest in Gippsland indicates that we're on the right track. So one of the things that I'm quite proud of recently is that because we now have 12 feasibility licences, the government can step back a little and work now more closely with licence holders. So recently, my team have established the Gippsland Licence Holders Advisory Committee. It includes all the feasibility licence holders, the 3 relevant Commonwealth agencies, so DECU, my agency, the Offshore Wind Regulator and the Offshore Wind Registrar. We've also recently included a Victorian Government representative. With 12 licence holders all working to the same outcome in a short period of time, there's potential for a lot of duplication, confusion within the community. So the establishment of the committee is a positive initiative that we're trying to allow licence holders and government to promote coordination between licences, advance consistent engagement protocols, work with local communities, First Nations groups, fishers and other marine users. We heard loud and clear in the first meeting that collaboration with communities between licence holders and governments will be critical. So we'll continue that work and some of the most pressing issues facing the industry will go through that licence holder committee. It's a lot on this slide, but I just wanted to focus on community engagement. So we heard a lot about that in the last 24, 48 hours. Communities must be at the centre of the discussion, with licence holders and with government. Some of you will be familiar with this diagram. We used something along these lines when we came out to consult on the declaration of the zone. It was through that consultation process that we shortened the zone, shaped it, and the Minister considered the community feedback before declaring the final zone. The important thing I want to get you to focus on this one is that we are only at the start of a long conversation with community and with licence holders over the development of the sector. Licence holders will be required to develop management plans. Under those plans, it's important that they consult appropriately with all relevant people, organisations, communities and groups, and before those activities are undertaken. Open and timely consultation will help build social licence, or we spoke about that yesterday, maybe cultural licence is a better phrase, but it will build cohesion in the region. Making sure that community is heard and really included in decisions will be critically important. Under the regulations, licence holders will need to make reasonable efforts to consult with all people. The management plans also set out the manner of consultation, and licence holders must provide sufficient information to the communities to allow them to be informed. The declaration of the zone is the first step, and as you can see on the slide, there are many other steps to go and many opportunities for the community to engage in the process. Now that leads me to First Nations engagement. So First Nations people are important partners in the renewable energy transition. Many First Nations communities are experiencing the impacts of climate change as well as unreliable and expensive power. They have a strong local and cultural knowledge, including management of the country, And that's really important to informing how Australia's transition progresses. As Australia transitions to a renewable energy superpower, many renewable energy projects will need to access First Nations land and waters for development, including offshore wind. So one of the other things other parts of the department I work in are doing is developing a First Nations clean energy strategy. And that strategy will give First Nations people a say in renewable energy policies and programs. It'll identify areas for improvement and future investment. It's underpinned by 3 goals: power First Nations communities with clean energy, resource equitable partnerships, and deliver economic benefits for First Nations people. It will inform the energy, climate, environmental, cultural and heritage reform processes that are also underway, and it'll deliver a national framework that will maximise the economic participation of First Nations people. In the case of offshore wind, the government has set clear expectations to licence holders that they will, 1, provide resources to First Nations groups to support meaningful and timely engagement, and 2, create a pathway for First Nations groups to negotiate benefit sharing arrangements that are tailored to their communities. As I mentioned earlier, Gippsland's leadership in the First Nations engagement is evident. GLaWAC have been actively engaged in our consultation processes, and this leadership has really helped in the consideration of a number of our regulations and the final declaration. So again, I'd like to thank Daniel Mullet and his colleagues at GLaWAC for this really excellent collaboration. He's not afraid to pick up the phone and give me a call if he's got a concern, and I'll always pick it up. So on broader local opportunities, so maximising the use of Australian businesses and workers in the offshore wind industry will really benefit the Australian economy and local communities, and it's a priority for the government, and the Minister will talk a bit more about that soon, so I don't want to take too much of his thunder. To achieve these benefits and seize the opportunity, we're developing a requirement in our regulations to ensure feasibility licence holders conduct early and meaningful engagement. I spoke about that a little bit earlier. But it's also engaged with Australian businesses at the local, state and national level to identify opportunities to supply goods and services into the Australian offshore wind supply chain. Part of the feasibility licence application process included assessment of a project's impact on and contribution to the Australian economy and local communities. That was under the National Interest Framework. So we already know the preliminary work these companies have done to identify the opportunities. What we want to do now through the management planning process is to progress that planning into outcomes. We want to make sure that these projects maximise their use of Australian supply chains and workers. So our approach that we're conducting with offshore wind regulations closely aligns with the government's Future Made in Australia community benefit principles, and that ensures that investment flows into communities in a way that benefits local workers and businesses. And these community benefit principles will be front of mind as we progress the development of offshore wind right across Australia. So we're aware that there are real opportunities for Australian workers and businesses in the offshore wind sector through local manufacturing, steel components, secondary steel, potentially jacket foundations and towers, and all the way through to advanced manufacturing. So these requirements we're developing will create a pathway for local businesses, many in the room now, to realise the opportunities and benefit from the new industry. On the topic of local opportunities, I'll also give a plug to the Net Zero Economy Agency. This agency resides in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. It's an agency that has legislative responsibility to support the energy transition in key regional areas. The Latrobe Valley is one of those. And it'll ensure that through retiring coal plants, for example, employee transition programs are in place and staff have a pathway. In terms of regulatory certainty, so we know that we need a stable regulatory environment to allow a solid investment to occur, and we know that's critical for offshore wind developers, many in the room. So to support feasibility licence holders, we're well on the way to establish a comprehensive framework for the industry. We're continuing to work through the finalisation of the regulations I mentioned earlier. We really want to allow licence holders to get out and undertake the necessary studies to test the feasibility of their projects. So my team consulted on draft regulations earlier this year, and we're really pleased to receive 100 submissions It called for several improvements to reduce administrative burden, to really help industry prepare the revised management plans. We're working through those now. We're trying to improve public transparency on the projects and further harmonise workplace health and safety requirements with model laws. So they're nearing completion, and we hope to have those done as soon as possible. We're also currently developing transmission and infrastructure licence guidelines. Once they're finalised, applicants will be able to apply for the transmission and infrastructure licences they need to connect their projects to the grid. Beyond that, in other parts of the department I work in, we're also investing in science and streamlining regulatory approvals. The government announced $65 million for targeted scientific work to improve environmental data and regulatory guidance, and that will be really important for renewable projects across the region. Through this work, we're hoping to develop better understanding of the impacts and really provide guidance for proponents on how to manage those. So, in closing, thanks again for the opportunity to speak. We've taken the first steps. The Gippsland region and the community will be instrumental in the success, so really get involved. We're establishing a new industry. It's not easy. It's multifaceted. It involves multi-years and multi-time frames, multiple lines of effort. We're committed to investing in a strong and effective partnership in the region, so you saw that through the Licence Committee. And a plug for our departmental booth. It's over in the hall over the way, so please pop in and have a chat to our staff. We're really keen to hear about the things that keep you up at night, so that we're informed about how we can develop the regulations and have the sector to succeed. So, thank you.
Terrific, mate. Well done. Thank you so very much. Thank you very much, Shane, and thank you very much for the efforts of the federal government. We do appreciate that, and appreciate you being here to explain that at the conference. I'd now like to move to another important area for us, and that is the authentic collaboration in cultural heritage management. And I'm very pleased to announce for a keynote speaker, please make welcome the General Manager on Country at GLaWAC, Katherine Mullet.
Good morning, everyone. Excellent, thank you. So as said before, my name is Katherine Mullet. I'm the General Manager on Country at GLaWAC. I'm a Gunai Kurnai Monero Nagario woman, and I've had the privilege of living on country and working and walking country for most of my life. So I take that privilege and I share that with you today. I want to acknowledge First Nations people in the room today. I also want to acknowledge my elders past and present, and acknowledge the country that we're all meeting on today, which is Gunai Kurnai country. And today I'm here to speak to you about authentic collaboration in cultural heritage management. So you probably all know already, but I'll go again. Who are we? So who are the Gunai Kurnai people? So we are the traditional owners of this country that you're standing on today. We span from Wilson's Prom up to Mount Baw, Mount Hotham, across the Snowy and right down to Cape Conran. And I acknowledge that that is not our full recognised country, but it is the country that my grandfather shared with me of our people. So we have 5 clan groups, and each of them together made the collective of Gunai Kurnai people. And together we care for country, we are custodians of country, and we are part of country. So GLaWAC is the organisation that is that came together after our native title settlement. We are a registered Aboriginal party, which means that we have statutory obligations underneath the Aboriginal Heritage Act to manage cultural heritage. In accordance to that Act, we are not the regulator, but we can act on behalf of the regulator. We are also a body corporate that has a membership of Gunai Kurnai people and represent the rights and interests of those people and community members across country, but also those that live outside of country. We still recognise their rights to this country. So cultural heritage, what is it? And what I've done is I've put up the definitions by the UNESCO and the Aboriginal Heritage Act. Now these are definitions that have been defined over many different ways, but do they represent what I would consider just solely and wholly cultural heritage? And as a Gunai Kurnai person, and I will speak to you today as that, I would say that this is a small detail of what actually culture is and cultural heritage is. So I've decided to pick up a whole bunch of photos to show you what cultural heritage is to the Gunai people, and it is our tangible heritage and it is our intangible heritage. It's our community, it is our country, it's the opportunity to work on country and be part of country, embedded in country, the economic opportunities out of country. It's about being able to share our knowledge with others. It's about sharing it with each other and with our community, and to pass down from our elders to one another. And it is basically everything. So for me, cultural heritage is everything that defines me as a person, everything that connects me to the ground, the sky, and everything in between. And when we think about collaborating on cultural heritage, I want everyone in this room to take that opportunity to think about that it's not just statutory functions underneath the Aboriginal Heritage Act, that cultural heritage is so much more than just meeting those basic obligations under that Act. It's about respecting country, it's about respecting community, it's about respecting knowledge holders, it's about respecting and supporting knowledge to be handed down, and providing those opportunities where it can be done. So what does authentic collaboration look like? What does it mean? What does it do? So understanding what the aspirations. So you can say that part of authentic collaboration, and there's multiple parts to this, and I'll go through those parts. But one of those parts is understanding the aspirations of the traditional owner group that you're working with. Now, I could focus just on GLaWAC, but I also want to acknowledge that there are other traditional owner organisations across the state, across the nation, that have different aspirations for their people and their community. And what's really important is to acknowledge just the basics that each mob and each group are different. They have different aspirations, they have different wants and needs for their community, and different ways that they want to lead and see that happen. So acknowledging and understanding that in a simple form is different for each mob and to each group. So learning the aspirations of the mob is really critical. Secondly, you've got understanding what true self-determination looks like. And I think everyone likes to use the term self-determination. They like to talk about self-determination. They like to talk about that we will support self-determination. But what does that actually look like in a practical setting? So you've got understanding the aspirations of the mob, and then understanding how do you support those aspirations via self-determination means. And self-determination ultimately is up to each group and each mob to lead and guide and decide. So it's not making funding restrictive, it's not making grants restrictive, it's not about putting the red tape around things, it's about making it open-ended and supportive so that the mob can use those funds, build a program that suits them and solely for them. So there's not one situation or one case that could work for each mob exactly the same. Each group is different, and we're going to need to consider that as part of an authentic approach to engaging around cultural heritage. Thirdly, you've got cultural protocols. So understanding the community and the mob that you're working with and what their protocols are. You've got aspirations, you've got self-determination, but now you've got a framework or protocols that you need to work within as well when you're engaging around cultural heritage management and engaging with that community and that mob. So understanding those protocols, or even just at the simplest form, understanding that you have no insight or knowledge of what those protocols are until you actually speak to that mob and speak to that community, and then you can engage through that process to build towards a more meaningful and authentic engagement approach and around heritage management. So understanding protocols is really important, and understanding that you don't know them, basically, until you talk to the mob themselves. And it will be different every single time. So fourthly, you've got resourcing. So again, we go through protocols, we go through self-determination, we go through aspirations, but how do you actually support the mob and that community to meet all those things? So you've got your target of what you want to achieve, but you've got the mob and the community have their target that they want to achieve. How do you support through meaningful resourcing to help deliver that? So again, when we go to heritage management, we need to be able to support mob to be able to get out on country, to learn about their culture, to learn about their heritage, to identify the values that are within the landscape. And then we need to be able to support those mob and communities to be able to do it, and to do it in the time frame that suits them. And that requires a lot of resourcing, particularly if you're looking at wanting elders to come out onto country, or young ones for teaching and learning purposes, if you're wanting to do extra research into those cultural values so that the community get a better understanding and learning of what those values are. We do it quite often. A lot of our programs on country have a research element to them, and that's about knowledge sharing. Then it's about capturing that data and that information and then presenting it in a format that supports our community to be able to understand it. And all of that requires different levels of resourcing to support. And the last one, which is probably the most critical bit around authentic engagement and authentic management of cultural heritage, is relationships. So relationships are incredibly critical. We can go through all those understandings of aspirations of the traditional owner corporation, how to support self-determination and what does self-determination for them look like, what the cultural protocols are, and then support by resourcing that. And if we don't follow those steps, then we can't really build a relationship. And relationships are about making our engagement human and acknowledging that each mob and community, they care deeply for country and their culture. They care deeply for everything that's the values in that landscape. And to do that and to understand that, you need to form a relationship. And to form a relationship means that we can have a meaningful and a collaborative approach around heritage management, because it's been led by the mob, led by the organisation and led by the community all the way through if we follow those steps. Heritage management. So at the end of the day, what we're here to talk about is also about compliance and management around Aboriginal Heritage Act and the tangible heritage that are required for us to work within and assess. So I've got some images up here of examples of where our mob and our community have led engagement and led cultural heritage management through partnerships, through relationships, to get outcomes where we are identifying and learning more about our culture and leading that approach to understand our cultural heritage and our tangible heritage in a way that we are also adding our cultural interpretation to that heritage. So it's not just a scientific archaeological dig, it's focused on a bit more of that storytelling, understanding that connection to that site and that culture. There are so many different sites out on country, and we can look at them like we could at the definitions of the Aboriginal Heritage Act as very clinical and very square, but each site has a story, each site has a connection to it, each site has a family or community member that is also connected to it. And my brother one day said something incredibly profoundly to me when I was walking, him and I were walking and doing cultural heritage surveys out in the Alpine National Park. And he picked up an artefact off the track. And as he picked it up and looked at it, and he goes, it's kind of crazy to think that the last person that left this here was a living descendant from us. And to remember that we are still connected to our cultural sites, that we are living descendants to the heritage that we look at, and to keep looking at it at a clinical, archaeological perspective and not add the human element, the emotional element, the cultural, the tangible, the connections, the stories to those sites, is to totally dismiss the value and respect of Aboriginal people and the cultural heritage of this landscape, this country. And as we continue to operate and develop the country, we will continue to lose those connections in those sites. And what's really important is to work with us through those processes so that we can get a meaningful outcome for our people in our community and our young ones, so they can continue to tell the stories, they can continue to connect to those sites. Even if they are gone from country, we still need to take the opportunity to be able to understand those sites and the values of those sites so we can keep the story alive. So I've just whizzed through my presentation. I don't know how quick I actually whizzed through it. And in all honesty, I wasn't prepared for a full auditorium. I thought I was doing a breakout room, so thank you to those that put me under this bus. It's also probably my poor planning and poor reading, which is probably, honestly, definitely that. So I was going to open out because I thought it was a breakout room for questions. So I'm not sure how that would actually operate in this forum, and I'm not quite clear on how quickly I've whizzed through. Excellent. Can we do questions or not?
Yeah, we got time for one, I think. I think there's one there, so I'll, if you don't mind.
Yep.
Okay, there's a question here that says, are traditional owners across the country worried about climate change and supportive of renewable energy in general? Assuming community consultation, of course, is done right and respectful and fair participation is offered, are traditional owners prepared to speed up the process for the sake of replacing coal with solar and wind? Excellent,
heavy question. Thank you. Look, honestly, we are concerned about cultural heritage values and the impacts of climate change on that. Our dune systems are an incredibly sensitive location. We are constantly seeing shifts and moves on the dune systems. They are predominantly where our old people are buried, and so that does definitely concern us. We have seen a rapid incline of impact to the dune systems, but we are doing GLaWAC's doing some amazing research programs to do mapping, to understand what that landscape currently looks like, what the impacts are going to be like, and to really, in a way, triage where we're going to work and operate to understand our values better and to preserve and protect those values where we can as well. So they're the things that we are able to do in collaboration with our partners. And the other part to the question was...
It was similar to that. It was just suggesting, that you're happy to work with, are you interested in speeding it up in the benefits of climate change? Probably I didn't say that very well.
No, it's okay.
Assuming community consultation is done right and respectfully and fair participation offered, are traditional owners prepared to speed up the process for the sake of replacing coal with solar and wind?
Without throwing my organisation under the bus, but I would say yes. I think any opportunity to be able to benefit country, culture and community is something that we will look to, and we would assess and make sure that the benefit matches our protocols, our aspirations, and our making sure that we're self-determining all those things.
And that finishes off, except there was someone that was on the question, but they said, thank Katherine for your presentation. It definitely deserved a big audience.
Okay, Thank you very much.
Thank you, Katherine. Thank you. I absolutely agree, and I think the more that we talk together, I think the better we all get. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm terribly sorry. I shouldn't say that. I'll say everyone. The next speaker, she's known to the world as the Eastern Victorian Region's representative in the Legislative Council of the State. See, I've never really read this before, so I apologise for all that. And the Minister for Housing, Water and Diversity. That's what the world knows Harriet as. We know her simply as Harriet. And I'd like now to invite onto the stage Harriet Shing. Thank you. Sorry.
No. Thanks, Darren. My apologies for giving you quite a mouthful. My name is Harriet. I am delighted to be here today on Bracklong Country. It is really wonderful to be able to follow Katherine in this discussion today. And I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands upon which we are meeting today, but also gathering from various quarters as we continue to lean into the opportunities that we are afforded through new energy, the really essential partnerships that exist in that space, in economic, in social, environmental, and in future-based terms around planning. So, it is a great pleasure to be back at this conference and to see so many familiar faces here today to continue this really important discussion that essentially Victoria has been leading for many, many years. There are a few things that I am going to touch on today. I don't want to give you death by data, but it is really important to talk about some of the achievements that we've attained to date through good partnerships, through good investment, through good processes spaces and through that space of attraction of new opportunities, including for global players in this space. So, I will touch on my beloved water portfolio shortly in talking about new energy and what is being delivered in one of the most energy-intensive sectors in Victoria. But I do want to talk about some of the most ambitious renewable energy targets that we have initiated here in Victoria. Getting to 95% by 2035 is something which has set the pace for the rest of Australia, and for good reason. Here in the Valley in particular, we have a really strong and proud history and tradition of building and creating infrastructure, jobs and output. And we have powered Victoria and then, by virtue of the grid, the nation from right here in the Latrobe Valley and from Gippsland further afield. And we know that as transition continues, we're moving to a mix of energy and storage, and that this is moving from the Latrobe Valley right through the region and informing the way in which we're developing and bedding down projects further across the state. So overall, in Victoria, we've seen around 5.4 gig of new large-scale renewable energy capacity from 80 different projects commissioned to date. And this really does speak to the aggregate of everything that we are doing in those market settings, in the social licence and in the transition space, and then also in the work that we are pulling together across all levels of government to make sure that we are conferring benefit upon communities now and also for future generations. So we've increased Victoria's renewable energy generation share to about 39% as at last year. And we know that it is because of a combination of things, including the policy settings, the work that we're doing on targets, and what we're doing by way of those incentives to create the best possible opportunities for investment here in the state. So our energy reduction targets, we've got 75% to 80% on 2005 levels by 2035 and net zero by 2045. Now, they are the most ambitious of any of the mainland Australian states. Within the water sector, and as Water Minister, we do lead the nation and in many ways lead the world in what a transition to renewable energy and then ultimately net zero looks like. And we see that water production is responsible for about 1% of the total drawdown on energy. It takes a lot of energy to sustain a range of sectors, whether that's health and hospital systems, haulage and what that means for emissions, or indeed the water sector. Thanks to the work across water corporations, we will get to 100% renewables within that sector by 2025 through a range of different resources, and by 2035, and in many cases 2030, be entirely net zero. So this is one example of how we are seeing different sectors coming together, not just to send really important market and pricing signals, but also to sustain that momentum that we need for the greater uptake of transitional and new energy opportunities. We announced our nation-leading energy storage targets of at least 2.6 gig in 2022. We want that to be energy storage capacity by 2030 and 6.3 gig by 2035. And we also announced in the same year, as many of you know, our offshore wind targets of at least 2 gig by 2032, 4 gig by 2035 and 9 gig by 2040. I did say I was going to not have death by data, and I've probably just killed you all with data, but the data is there for a really important reason. It does show that what we are doing is working. And it's not a straightforward process. It's not an easy process. It's often really intricate. It requires many component parts to come together, but it is working. And in that sense, to see that we've seen such a huge increase in the number of attendees at this conference shows that the levels of interest are there and the buy-in is there. The question for us is how we sustain that momentum, and that's also providing us with a number of really important opportunities, whether that's employment, job skills and training, leaning into what we do to address population growth and those changes and challenges that will continue to provide us with a lot of policy conversations over the coming decades. So, the targets are backed by nation based policies, and we do have the benefit of the federal minister and federal senator coming in to talk in a little bit. So we want to make sure that we are providing that certainty and that clarity to businesses and to communities and to industry players as we prepare for the implementation of net zero and renewable energy transition. The investment destination, which of course I and many others in this room are very biased toward, will see that Victoria does become really the crown jewels of how we develop and deliver renewable energy. We're talking about the destination of choice for an economy of around 130 trillion US dollars in global private finance that is available for the net zero transition. And here in Victoria, and here particularly along our coastline with offshore wind and a range of renewable developments, we are pretty much prime real estate for delivery and attraction of those projects. We've got a global movement toward climate action. Taking action to meet those 2035 emissions targets will deliver us economic benefits of many billions of dollars, about $63 billion in fact, between now and 2070. So, jobs are a really important part of this work, and we've spent around $1 billion in the work and the infrastructure, the framework for the SEC, and how that will then position us to deliver tens of thousands of jobs, including through the free TAFE initiatives, the things that link up vocational education and training, on-the-job learning, and those opportunities for apprenticeships and careers, really well-paid careers in an industry which is going from strength to strength. Whether that's battery energy storage, whether that's the work associated with renewable energy manufacturing, storage, or indeed recycling. And we know we've got Solar Creek here in Gippsland that's doing a power of work to change the dynamic and the conversation about what we are doing with solar panels at end of life, that we do have these opportunities and these jobs within a circular economy. And this shows just how far we've come in the last 20 years. It was not that long ago that people thought, for example, back to my baby of water, that methane and that gas that was something to be dispatched of, disposed of, had no other use. And now we are seeing that this is able to be deployed in a range of different ways that are cutting emissions, that every part of a cycle and of a process can now be used for purposes that create economic opportunity, jobs, and then reduce our emissions and footprint overall. So these are some significant steps toward innovation in a sector and a community that is increasingly hungry for positive change that delivers on those economic results. So up to 12 projects are already under development here in Gippsland, and they have really paved the way for a further 25 gigawatts of power generation. And as I said, the aggregate continues to develop momentum. Bringing the community along with us is a really important part of this work, and this is where Offshore Wind Energy Victoria's work in releasing the 4th Offshore Wind Implementation Statement will be another important part of the discussion and the various chapters of transition. And we know here in the Valley that transition is something that requires long-term investment and commitment. It is something which needs to endure beyond a forward estimates process, beyond successive parliaments. It needs to be something which leaves affected communities with a sense of opportunity and prosperity, and also enables diversity of economies. This is where processes from government can and should create the conditions that are most favourable to getting those transitions done and done well. And in launching our action for the proposed support package, there will be an auction process for the first tranche of offshore wind, including an expression of interest phase to close in early 2025, which many of you will be aware of, followed by a request for proposal stage, and that RFP will close in early 2026. We've started construction on the first SEC project too, and I'll touch very briefly on that. The Melbourne Renewable Energy Hub, that's one of the world's largest batteries, and we know that right here in the Valley we are also developing those at-scale batteries to address the opportunities to store and then to deploy energy at various times during the day. So, a lot of work going into this space. The Centre of Training Excellence, and I'll round off with this, is one of the very human impacts of what we're trying to deliver. When we talk about energy, we are essentially talking about people, and we're talking about families being able to meet the cost of energy. Renewable energy is the cheapest form of energy available to us. It is far more certain than a pipe dream of nuclear, which may exist into the coming decades at enormous cost without any proof of concept being established for scale, and with the drawdown of billions of litres of water, might I add. We've got a lot of work to do, but there is an enormous amount of goodwill and determination to make sure that projects like the ones I've flagged, like the ones you've heard about in the last couple of days, not only stack up, but are positioned by Victoria's unique market conditions to really thrive and to set us up really well for generations to come. I'm known for talking far too long. We don't have time limits in the upper house. It may well be tomorrow, for all I know, in the lack of natural light here in this room. So I might pass back to Darren, and perhaps we can continue the conversation if there are any questions. But thank you for being part of this work. It happens in and with and for and by communities every single day. This is what we continue to take from discussions like this, and I want to congratulate everybody who's been involved in bringing so many people together for this ongoing conversation and continuing, as we need to do as governments, the support for realising those results into the long term. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're right. Thank you, Harriet. Thank you. There's so many people here. I'm not entirely sure why. And it's probably coming to the business end. Last year we were extremely fortunate to have Senator Jess Walsh visit us in Sale and gave a great speech of recommendation and started a collaboration with the conference, of which we really appreciate. And this year she decided to bring some friends along, which is terrific. So I'd like to invite onto the stage our friend, and hopefully yours as well, Senator Jess Walsh.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Darren. I would like to start by acknowledging the Gunai-Kurnai traditional owners of the land that we're all meeting on today and pay my respects to elders past and present. And I'd really like to extend that respect to all First Nations people who are with us here today from across the great state of Victoria and indeed across the nation as well. I am genuinely really excited to be back here at GNEC after Sale last year. And the reason that I'm excited to be here is really the incredible passion and commitment and enthusiasm that this community, the Gippsland community, is bringing to embracing and driving your own renewable energy future. It really is inspiring to be part of it. And so I have brought friends this year, as Darren said, and it is a real pleasure to be here to introduce our next special guest, who is indeed, of course, Australia's Minister for Climate Change and Energy. And it's a genuine honour to welcome him back to Victoria and back to the region that is now absolutely leading the way on renewable energy in our state. It was just less than 2 years ago that our government declared the first offshore wind zone in the country right here in Gippsland. And in just the past few months, we've been able to lay the foundations of an industry together that has the capacity to produce more energy than the entire state of Victoria generated last year, and to do that right here off the Gippsland coast. And this industry also has the capacity to generate the thousands of jobs that this community needs and that this community deserves as it takes its place in the renewable energy future. And again, I have to say that this community has done a truly outstanding job of embracing the opportunity of offshore wind and really driving forward that future. And of course, offshore wind is just one of the renewable technologies that Gippslanders are embracing as we all chart a path forward to net zero together. So it is truly fitting that we have with us today the Minister who is leading this change in Australia, the Minister who is working with all of us to build our net zero future, the Minister who is helping to build that future here in Gippsland and right around the nation. So please join with me in giving a huge Gippsland welcome, a huge Victorian welcome to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy in the Albanese Government, Chris Bowen.
Thank you. Stretching from the Great Dividing Range into the Tasman Sea, these lands and waters have been under the stewardship of the Gunai for millennia, a fact we acknowledge and celebrate. While acknowledgement and celebration are correct, they're not sufficient. First Nations people, particularly in remote Australia, suffer energy poverty and crippling rates of electricity disconnection. But more positively, this energy transformation provides an opportunity for First Nations peoples to share in the ownership and dividends from renewable energy on their communities and on their lands. Now, later today, I'll be at the launch of the Gippsland Offshore Wind Alliance, which includes First Nations representatives, traditional owners, represented here today by the Gunai Land and Waters Corporation, rightly have an important role to ensure that economic and jobs opportunities flowing to this region do not bypass First Nations peoples. The opportunities are big so long as we choose to take them. I intend to take them, and I know the community intends to take them as well. Well, it's wonderful to be back in the Gippsland region today, and thanks for the invitation to attend this excellent conference, and congratulations to everyone who's been involved. More than once I've been told that in renewable energy circles, this is the best ticket in town. Second only to the AFL qualifying final tickets this weekend, perhaps. I'm lucky enough to have tickets to both. I'm here today and I'll get to watch my beloved GWS Giants beat the Sydney Swans on Saturday. I also want to acknowledge our friend Senator Jess Walsh, who does a great job in the Albanese government representing regional Victoria and particularly representing the views and needs of this community in our caucus, and she's a great friend and a great friend of this region. I also acknowledge Minister D'Ambrosio, who was here yesterday. She's a key partner for us, working very closely, particularly on offshore wind, and of course I acknowledge Minister Harriet Shing, who you've just heard from. Now, you don't need me to tell you, Gippsland is at the heart of our energy transition. No community across Australia has a bigger claim to that mantle than Gippsland. And to be honest with you, Gippsland is also a case study in what can go wrong and what can go right. The best example of a disorderly transition, of communities being ill-treated, was the sudden closure of the Hazelwood Power Station. Inadequate notice and planning left the community and government scrambling to adjust and respond. And people paid the price and no doubt still are. But in many ways, the best example of getting it right are also happening here today as well. You have the most developed offshore wind plans in Australia. And the federal and Victorian governments are working with proponents and the community to ensure these projects provide good, well-paying jobs for people who currently work in the traditional energy sector for future generations. And we're going to continue to do so, and that's the key, making sure it works for the community. So for me, it comes down to this fundamental question. The transition is going to happen, the climate demands it, and the economics demand it. But will it be orderly or disorderly? My goal since becoming minister has been to make the transition faster and more orderly. In no small part because this is the best way of giving regions like yours the best shot at maximising the massive economic opportunities of this transition. The transition plays to your strengths and knowledge about electricity generation, workforces, supply chains, and how agriculture and energy can and should coexist. So I've talked this morning a bit about the need for an orderly transition, and the key to an orderly transition is certainty. This region needs jobs. Jobs need investment. Investment needs certainty. It's as simple as that. And our policies are designed to create that certainty. Certainty as to our destination and certainty as to our roadmap to get there. There are other policies that are designed to undermine certainty. I'll say a little bit about that a bit later. But I want to spend most of this speech giving you a progress report on our plans to unleash more dispatchable renewable energy, more investment and more jobs through a stable, welcoming and certain policy environment. This area is a case study for practical progress and the benefits it creates. Over the next few years, we'll see industries, supply chains and jobs ramping up to support the rollout of Australia's first offshore wind zone. First generation is expected to come online about 2030. As I said, the most advanced of the 6 zones we have across the country. 2 days ago, I declared the Bunbury zone. We're making progress on the others, but Gippsland is at the front. Our declaration of the offshore wind zone and issuing of feasibility licences supports the Victorian Government's target of 2 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2032. And we're already seeing businesses and locals pivot to take advantage of these opportunities, as you know better than I do. Dean Carter, who's here today, is a utility worker at Yallourn. He and some of his colleagues are already thinking about adding to their skill set so that they can stay working locally and be part of this jobs boom to ensure that they can capitalise on the advantages. Energy Australia has said publicly that all of the jobs they have at Yallourn have the ability to transition into offshore wind. And in the most recent sitting week in Canberra, the Senate passed our Net Zero Economy Authority. The authority's sole job is to focus on regions just like this. Plenty of people have made suggestions to me about other things the authority should do. Look at other things. I've said no to every single suggestion, as good as some of those suggestions are, because it would take away the focus of the Net Zero Economy Authority from the Gippsland and other regions undergoing economic transition. So their sole job is to bring together and help coordinate regional bodies, unions, industry, investors, First Nations groups and communities like this one through this period of transition. It will help facilitate the jobs and benefits of the economic transformation that comes with moving to net zero. It'll help coordinate training and redeployment of workers in traditional energy industries to ensure that they have access to the new jobs being created. The policy settings like this that the Albanese government has put in place to support the rollout of new onshore solar and wind and to get on with delivering offshore wind around Australia are providing that certainty now. This in turn provides certainty for communities in the Gippsland region and others like it that your economic and social future is secure. About 10 minutes from here, the Hazelwood Solar Farm is set to become Victoria's largest solar farm with a large on-site battery that can store the same amount of energy that the solar farm will produce, which would be enough to run 170,000 homes for 4 hours. That will be completed this decade, not in future decades, but this decade. Construction will start in a couple of months and provide jobs for up to 500 people working across specialties, including building, engineering, site maintenance, agri-solar, and setting the site up to accommodate sheep that will share the land. And this is the point about the coexistence of agriculture and solar. Australia's largest solar farm in Uralla also is host to 6,000 sheep who often gather under the solar panels to get shade on a particularly hot day. The Hazelwood Solar Farm is just one of the new, clean, reliable, renewable energy projects set for Victoria. When we came to office just over 2 years ago, we knew that under the previous government, 24 coal plants had announced that they would close before 2035, taking 90% of generation out of our grid. 4 gigawatts of dispatchable energy had left the grid over the last decade, but only 1 gigawatt had come on, leaving us particularly exposed. And there was no policy regime to encourage the new investment that we needed. The previous government had promised a capacity investment mechanism, but they didn't deliver it. We've designed a capacity investment scheme and now we're delivering it. And it's already working better than expected. This reliable renewables plan is about unlocking private sector investment to build at least 32 gigawatts of solar and wind generation and storage in grids across Australia between now and 2030. And we know from experts who operate the grids that that will be enough not only to replace any coal that retires before then, but also to meet the increased demand from households and businesses using more electricity as people electrify. And we're getting on with the job of delivering it now. In December last year, we opened applications for new dispatchable capacity, such as big batteries, to be built in Victoria and South Australia. Now, this was a pilot of the broader scheme. The response has been huge, massively oversubscribed, and this is a massive vote of confidence in our renewable energy pipeline. We asked for 600 megawatts worth of bids. We received bids for 19 gigawatts. We asked for 600 megawatts, we got bids for 19 gigawatts, 32 times more than we asked for. And today, here, I'm announcing the winners, the 6 very high-quality battery projects that have been successful. Now, remember, we asked for 600 megawatts. We've managed to deliver a gigawatt, just short of a gigawatt of storage by 2027 because the bids have been such high quality. This is a huge indication, as I said, of the strength and quality of the projects underpinning our transition. These projects will soak up cheap, clean energy from renewable generation ready to be discharged into the grid as needed, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, one of the projects supported by the CIS auction is Energy Australia's Warreen energy storage system, which will be built near here at the Gippsland power station just outside of Morwell. The 350 megawatt utility battery can power 400,000 households for up to 4 hours at a time. It's scheduled to be operational by 2027 and will employ 80 people and rely on local suppliers. It means between this and the Hazelwood Solar Farm batteries, both within a 10-kilometre radius of where we are today, there's now the equivalent of a mid-sized coal-fired power station worth of energy at your fingertips, ready to go. Gippsland's transformation to a national powerhouse for reliable, renewable energy is well underway. The second successful project in Victoria is the Springvale Energy Hub, on the site of what used to be landfill in southeastern Melbourne. This 115 megawatt 2-hour battery energy storage system to be developed by Progress Power will be also online by mid-2027. It'll provide 50 full-time and part-time jobs during design and construction and 7 ongoing jobs. In South Australia, we have successful projects, the Clements Gap 60 megawatt battery operated by Pacific Blue, the Harriet 50 megawatt battery owned by Energy Australia, the Solar River battery storage, part of a hybrid project of 256 megawatts operated by Zen Energy, and the Limestone Coast West 250 megawatt lithium ion battery storage operated by Pacific Green on the Limestone Coast just near the border with Victoria. Now, this is an important point. These projects are, of course, important for reliability. They'll put downward pressure on electricity prices and will help us move to a net zero. But a key criteria in this auction, and I make no apologies for this, is local community benefit. We don't just want to know how much energy they can produce at what cost. We've asked them to tell us what's in it for the community that will host them, and those projects have received favourable consideration. And these benefits will start flowing now, not in 20 years' time, but now. Projects that can demonstrate genuine, deliverable, meaningful community benefit have been prioritised over others. We aren't looking for the cheapest projects, we're looking for the best projects that can transform the electricity sector and help transform local communities. And we're seeing that with the projects we've announced today. The Warreen project, for example, includes a $500,000 Light the Way Community Future Fund to fund initiatives developed in consultation with the local community. Additional funds will be provided by the proponent for engineering scholarships and placements at Federation University, which is specialised in renewable energy sector training. There's also funding for fire service equipment and training. 10% of the workforce hours during construction will be filled by local apprentices and cadets partnering with TAFE Gippsland. There's a requirement that 25% of the project contract value will meet local content requirements. An additional $500,000 has been set aside for the training of First Nations peoples. So I take these commitments seriously, and they'll be contractually binding on the proponents. They must be delivered under the Capacity Investment Scheme. This first standalone state-focused tender for reliable renewables has delivered great outcomes for local communities, but I want to make this important point as well. This is just the first step. The first national tender, which we launched in May, contains even more onerous requirements to ensure local community benefit. And I'll continue to consider further requirements in future auctions, which will happen every 6 months. We'll get better at this as we go. We'll tweak the requirements as we go to ensure that there is real community benefit for the communities hosting the renewable energy. So our plan to increase reliability, reduce emissions and energy bills by bringing in more cheap, reliable and renewable generation into the grid is working. Our plan's the one backed by credible experts to deliver Australia the power we need when and where we need it. Last week, AEMO released its forecast for supply and demand in the grid over the next 10 years. It's a regular event. It proves that the path we're already on, and the Gippsland and Latrobe Valley is already on, is the right one. Now, for years, these statements of opportunity issued by AEMO have shown reliability gaps. Every single statement of opportunity ever released since they started mid-last decade has shown a reliability gap. That's what they're designed for, to show where the gaps are and to encourage investment. But the reliability gap in this issue is smaller and further away than it ever has been before. So that's real progress. The reliability gap now is the smallest it's ever been and the furthest away it's ever been. But I'll be frank with you, and this is where I'll conclude with a few words about the alternative. This report also showed a huge risk to reliability if this investment pipeline stops, if we have a government with an anti-renewable strategy or a nuclear strategy. Having talked so far about the progress we've made, I'm now going to spend a minute on what's at stake in this debate. The massive risk that is the Coalition's alternative plan to build nuclear reactors and what that represents. Now, my objection to nuclear is not moral, it's practical. And it's about the investment it will draw away from renewable energy as well. I mentioned earlier the importance of certainty and a welcoming environment for investment. A nuclear plan is the opposite of that. It's a recipe for uncertainty, and I think deliberately so. Nuclear energy for Australia is at best decades away. Even if it's a good idea, which I don't think it is decades away. And it's so expensive that even Coalition policy has admitted it would not be built by the private sector. It would not be funded by the private sector. It would all be funded by government. Now, why would a renewable energy company want to invest in Australia if they knew they'd be competing with a government distortion of the market in the order of hundreds of billions of dollars, which is what it would be? It's a recipe to drive away investment in clean, cheap, renewable generation, and it's a recipe for unreliability. The Liberals and the Nationals say, and this is a quote, "We will sweat the coal assets for longer." Now, people in Gippsland know better than most that our coal-fired power stations are coming to the end of their lifespan. As they get older, here's the thing, they don't get more reliable. They get less reliable. They break down more often. There hasn't been a day, let's think about this for a moment. There hasn't been a day in the last year when we haven't had an unplanned outage in a coal-fired power station somewhere in Australia. Planned outages we can deal with. Scheduled maintenance, we know about that. Coal-fired power breaks down, and there hasn't been a day in the last year where we haven't been dealing with a breakdown in coal-fired power. Sweating the assets out to 2040 or 2050, as the alternative plan has us doing, will put our energy system at risk of more unplanned outages as the fleet gets older. Unplanned outages cause wholesale prices to spike, which translates to higher bills. You know how old the power stations are here. Your lawn, 50 years old, Loy Yang A, 40 years old. As a 51-year-old, there are things I could do in my 20s I can't do now. And a coal-fired power station isn't much different. The idea that these and other coal assets might need to be sweated for longer is a recipe for a massive system instability. Now, this region understands the economics and engineering of coal-fired power. You know more than most how often they're out of action, and you know that banking and putting everything on an extension of coal-fired power is a hugely risky plan. The operators of these coal-fired power stations have planned to close them within the decades. The exit of just 2 of these alone will leave a gap of 3.6 gigawatts in the East Coast grid. And the opposition does not have a plan to fill that gap. They just simply don't have a plan. If they ever had a chance to implement that plan, it would see energy investment fall, developers walk away, local and global capital leave Australia, and jobs not created. And those community benefits I talked about before simply disappear. So delay and uncertainty and inaction are, in my view, not an option. We must be implementing sensible solutions now, not in a decade or 2 decades, to be certain that Australia's energy needs will be met. The Liberal Party and National Party say they want to stop renewable energy investments and stop offshore wind. I do note they have a different view about Gippsland. I welcome that, I really do. But they are opposed to offshore wind everywhere else. And they want to stop investment, stop jobs and stop benefits flowing while we wait for nuclear to maybe come forward one day. Now, we know we need to stay the course. Governments are staying the course. Victoria's Energy Minister was here yesterday talking to you about her plans. They don't include nuclear, they do include a lot of offshore wind. We've had every state government come out and say they won't support nuclear. But the coalition is determined to push it through against the will of states. Now, that's not how you do business to get a transition done. You work in cooperation and partnership. The capacity investment scheme shows what happens when you have cooperation between the states and the federal government, and the sorts of announcements I'm making today. We're supporting private investment to deliver more renewables by 2030, and we're working together to better address some of the challenges around planning and community engagements to get these projects built right in the first place as well. I want to continue to partner with you, with your local governments, with your mayors, with your regional development organisations, with people across the board, with community groups, unions and businesses, to get this transition right for the country and right for the regions which host it. And as I said at the outset, none more important than Gippsland. I believe Gippsland and its economy will not only survive this transition, but prosper and thrive because of it on the back of this transition. And I'm committed to making that a reality in partnership with you. Thanks for having me here today.
Thank you so very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, we've got a very tight schedule and the Minister we won't do questions right now. But please, and thank you, Minister, also for your support of the conference. You've always been easy to deal with, and please go back to your department too. They've been fantastic. But on behalf of everybody here today, it's been absolutely wonderful to see you here in the Latrobe Valley today, and thank you very much for your speech. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the Minister. Thank you, thank you. And that takes us, everyone, to the break. After, of course, we go to our breakout sessions. We look forward to seeing you. Thank you very much for being part of this session.
Energy revolution after coal and oil and gas, and likely being the last one, because if you get this run right, it's a sustainable business, and we don't need to invent anything new. We just need to improve what we have. But in order to get there, we need to make it right. And making it right is making this a sustainable industry. And the presentation today is very much about how to get it right, how to coexist with the other activities, and how to make sure that offshore wind can have significant benefits for the community. So I'd like to start by introducing our company, BlueFloat Energy. So we're a global offshore wind developer. We only do offshore wind, and we decided from the get-go to become a global company. And that you can reflect by our global presence. We have activities in 10 different markets, essentially in Europe and APAC, with a significant pipeline of projects across the globe, more than 33 gigawatts of capacity under development in more than 30 projects, both floating and fixed bottom, with very strong presence in APAC, which is one of our growth regions beyond Australia. We have a presence in New Zealand. I'm traveling there on Saturday, in the Philippines and Taiwan. We are a relatively young player in this industry. I started the company back in 2020. But it has been an amazing journey ever since. We have been growing quite fast, moving to 21 team members. 1 year later, 77 back in 2022, and today we count on close to 150 colleagues across the globe with an amazing experience, a lot of talent. But this growth has only been possible thanks to all the partners that have worked together with us to turn these projects into successful projects, both in terms of project partners who are co-investing and developing this project with us, but even more importantly, all the different partners who are contributing one way or another to the success of these projects. As I said, an amazing team of professionals, more than 400 years of collective experience in the offshore wind industry, more than 100 years of collective experience, 100 fixed bottom projects as collective experience. Floating wind being one of our key differentiating factors, and we are applying this also in Australia, in New South Wales, with more than 20 operational, under construction and development projects, and an experience that spans all the steps of the development and construction phase in offshore wind, including consenting, supply chain, or financing. In Australia, of course, we are very much present. We have been working in this country for more than 3 years. This is my third time here, which is always very energizing and very exciting. And we were one of the first players to believe in this market. That explains why I think we are relatively well known among the different communities in the different projects we are developing. So we have submitted feasibility license applications in 3 areas in Gippsland Down, and we were lucky and very happy to receive a feasibility license earlier this year for our Gippsland Down project, which is located on the eastern part of the region, with the capacity, the potential capacity of 2.1 gigawatts, which means basically more than 140 turbines, capacity to deliver power to 1 million homes in Victoria. The more recent application is for the South Pacific project off the coast of Illawarra. That's a floating project in deeper waters between 130 and 300 meters for a total capacity of 1.6 gigawatts. So Australia is one of our top priority markets worldwide and one of the markets where we have a strongest presence. But there's a key ingredient in all this work we are doing, and a common theme across different geographies, which is our stakeholder engagement process. This is very core to our DNA. This is something we believe is critical for success. It's not just something that you have to do, you need to do because somehow you're expected to do so. We believe this is something key in order to achieve success. And the way we do this is through a model that develops what we see as a virtuous cycle. It all starts by being proactive in informing very early on in the process in a very proactive and transparent manner about our plans. So collaboration starts with openness, transparency, and proactivity. And that triggers something which is absolutely critical, which is involvement of the different communities, stakeholders, and the opportunity, and it's a chance for us to understand suggestions, improvements, concerns, aspirations that allows us to make our projects better. All that stimulates strategic alliances. So it's not just about listening, it's also about getting into concrete actions about what needs to be done and how projects, offshore wind projects, can become a source of social and economic development for local communities. So this is a cycle that we keep feeding. It's not just one time action. It's something that needs to happen very early on, but in a continuous basis. And we do this with some key principles. First is being very local. And I hope you had the opportunity to meet our team here. It's an amazing team. A team made of local people with experience in developing complex projects. It's about transparency, as I was commenting before, receptivity, proactivity. I always insist when I travel across the globe to participate in these community meetings. Because for me, it's a unique chance of listening what we are there for, which is to build projects that can sustain the aspirations of people across our different regions, our different geographies. So there's some level of selfishness here, because through this effort, we are able to make our projects better. We improve our projects. It's also a way to fast-track our projects. The one key reason why projects are delayed, and that's a common theme across geographies, is because this stakeholder engagement is not done properly. And when you observe why projects are delayed, they're usually delayed because they're being challenged, because they weren't defined or designed properly. So this effort we are doing is the perfect recipe for success in terms of fast-tracking projects, because we can secure a high level of alignment with local communities. It's about securing development and supply chain partners. We always prefer to have local supply. It's always easier to manage, closer, less prone for unpredicted events, and the only way to secure that is to be there early on. It's also important to secure public support and also to build the credibility that is required to become a reliable partner for authorities when they develop their policies and regulations. All this is translated in the consenting process. So consenting is about basically achieving all the right permits to eventually be able to build a project. But you can do that just by the book, or you can do that by incorporating all these lessons that we get out of the interaction with local communities. In our case, we bring this very much into our process. We leverage our global expertise. We have experts which have gone through consenting in, as I said before, more than 7 gigawatts of offshore wind projects in places like the UK, which is probably one of the most experienced countries in consenting projects. But that is not enough. The key ingredient here is connecting all that global experience with the reality of the local reality. And that is what our local team, through all these engagements, is bringing to the table. So that affects all the steps in the consenting process: site selection, the different alternatives we consider and we propose in our consenting applications. We embed mitigation measures in these projects. We find solutions to mitigate potential impacts. We minimize those impacts and mitigate them, and consider the effectiveness and implications of these mitigation measures over time. As a last resource, we consider compensation, but that's always the last resource, because ideally the first and foremost priority is to reduce impact and to favor coexistence. So let me illustrate how we do this in practice, because all these I just said are good principles. I hope everybody will agree with them, but it's really hitting the ground running that you can really be effective. So what I'm bringing here is very concrete examples of how we conduct that. So, as I said before, local communities are paramount, at the center of our development efforts. And very early on, and on a continued basis, we try to find ways of engaging with those communities. Common to all of our projects worldwide is community sessions, which are numerous. I hope you had the opportunity to participate in those here in Gippsland. And if not, you will have the opportunity, because we plan to continue doing this over time. Here you have some pictures. Some of them are from Sail, from Seaspray. Last year I was in Worley, close to where we are today. The year before in Sail, in these community sessions. And again, it's a very good learning opportunity. The picture in the middle is from Fraserburgh in Inverness-shire in the UK, where we have some of our bigger projects in Europe. The other picture is from the Day of the Earth in Catalonia in Spain. And there's hundreds of these, because we're conducting literally hundreds of community engagement. So that's paramount. We also, based on the feedback we receive, organize educational campaigns. These are other examples. Fish fry event in Taiwan is a very popular event conducted every year, in which fish is released to promote fisheries and so on and so forth. And it was a great opportunity to conduct an educational session with local communities there. That happened earlier this year. In Catalonia, again, we had sessions. That's a street in Girona, which is a beautiful city in northern Spain. They closed the street, and here we go. And they invited neighbors to come in and participate and ask questions. Sometimes one of the challenges is to address fake news and fake facts about offshore wind. So we also conduct campaigns like this video we prepared also in Catalonia to try to counter some of these false arguments about offshore wind. The last picture here on the top right-hand corner is one initiative which I have a special preference for, which is the events for kids. So we organize events for schools in which we go to the beach and kids have the opportunity to play with different types of foundations and turbines and how they see firsthand how this works. Based on all this, we develop community benefit schemes. Here's a couple of examples. We have engaged with Energy for All, which is the largest and most reputed NGO dedicated to community benefits in the UK. We are working with them to convey the experience from onshore wind into offshore wind. Second picture here is an agreement we signed to fund the ACWO Foundation. ACWO is one of our local partners in France, so that we could fund through this foundation different local benefit schemes. Local content is also very important. Some examples are a study we conducted in Italy to detail the potential for offshore wind in the Italian economy, or an agreement we signed with the Metal Association in Galicia, or the New Zealand Steel here close to where we are in New Zealand, to promote the use of local steel for offshore wind. So again, local engagement is very important, and one of the key challenges is how to ensure the support from fishing communities. The experience shows that if done properly, coexistence is a reality, and actually offshore wind can have, not only can coexist with the fishing industry, but can have benefits for the fishing industry. So here again, being proactive and arriving early on is paramount. A couple of examples of our projects is in the UK. We extended one of our projects through 2 different areas. That was part of within the areas defined by the Marine Special Planning, but after those one being nominated, some fishing communities raised their concerns, and we were able, in conjunction with Crown Estate Scotland, to move one of the areas so that we can preserve one of the fishing areas that were spotted as being more productive. In Spain, our Parc Tramuntana project is located on a sanctuary for fish breeding. The fishing industry doesn't fish there because they keep these for breeding purposes, and they recommended us to install to locate the project there because it could provide shelter to these little fish and participate in these fish recovering efforts. So there's ways to collaborate, there's ways to have shared benefits also with the fishing communities. Another example, it's very important to understand that even though the questions may be the same or similar across different regions and geographies, the answers and the concerns might be different. So in Italy, for example, one of the key concerns was the potential impact on tourism. Some of the areas we are developing our projects are live out of tourism to a large extent, and there were concerns about how an offshore wind farm could affect tourism. So what we did was jointly with the local authorities and the local communities to conduct a joint survey among local tourists about the perception about offshore wind. And that demonstrated that actually tourists don't perceive that as a threat. They actually like to travel to a region where the power they use comes from renewable sources. Actually, we've seen in some geographies these projects becoming a tourist attraction. In Brighton, in southern England, during the summer period, there are tens of trips down every day to visit the wind farms. So just like we're watching, you have wind farm watching, attracting tourists. So this addressed some of the concerns, and it proved that it's not a threat for tourism and if you do it right, it could be right the opposite. Of course, among the local communities, First Nations, traditional owners are particularly focus of our efforts. And that's something that is a reality not just here in Australia, but in other geographies where we are working, like New Zealand or Colombia. And it's interesting to see that there's some common features about what is unique about these First Nations cultures. The attachment to the Mother Nature, the very long tradition, oral tradition is also a common theme. So for us, this is a good source of learning, and we are definitely committed to continue engaging with GLaWAC here in Gippsland, with the Kunai people, to make sure that our developments first are respectful with the cultural heritage. That could be an opportunity to learn more about that cultural heritage, because some of the seabed we will be using is traditional land that was above water 1,000 years ago. And hopefully we can find ways of leveraging our site assessment to learn more about the cultural heritage in that area. We respect the Kunai people's right for self-determination, and we would like to contribute to that through opportunities for social and economic development. So we are already engaging. We are very thankful to GLaWAC for giving us the opportunity to engage directly with the representatives. We are conducting cultural awareness trainings, thorough cultural impact assessments, and exploring collaboration opportunities. Environmental issues are also very critical for our developments, and that's something we take very seriously. Same thing, we engage early on with environmental groups. This is an example in Italy where we're invited by one of the most renowned environmental groups there called Legambiente to participate in a 2-day event they organize every year. And we were invited to share our vision about how offshore wind could be a way of decarbonizing the economy in a sustainable manner. We also founding members of an initiative in the Mediterranean called Ocean, which is an alliance between environmental groups, transmission system operators and developers. There was an experience in the North Sea, which was very successful, and leveraging on that experience, we were invited to participate in the similar organization for the Mediterranean, which is one of the growth areas for the future in offshore wind in Europe. So we're the first developers, so far the only one. There's others coming into this organization that is supported and participated by entities like the World Wide Fund or BirdLife. As you can see, it's a far-reaching exercise. It involves many hours of work, but we see this as a good investment of our time because, as I said before, it has many benefits for the communities, but benefits also for our projects. We are part of many organizations. I will not list these. We have been founding members of some of the organizations that are sponsoring a sustainable way of developing offshore wind. And I would like to highlight that, of course, all these principles that we are applying in our projects worldwide, we are also applying them here in Gippsland. So I encourage you to be active members of this effort through community drop-in information sessions by reaching out to our local team. We will soon open a local office for community members. We have stakeholder meetings. We have a youth panel to provide feedback on key areas of the project. We have supply chain engagement events and more that will come. So I really encourage all of you to participate in these different sessions and be an active member of the Gippsland Dawn project. I would like to finalize by highlighting that all these efforts requires transparency, and we are sharing all the efforts we are conducting worldwide through our webpage. I really encourage you to visit this. I think it's unique in the industry. It's called the World of BlueFloat Energy, and you can navigate the world, spot our projects, and learn more about what we are doing with communities in all our different geographies. Everything is in there. It's being updated over time. And I always insist that solution that can work somewhere doesn't necessarily work somewhere else, but there's always a way of inspiring ourselves about what communities are telling us in different parts of the world. Thank you very much for being here, for your attention. I think there's some time for Q&A.
There's none.
There's none? Okay. But I'm happy to take questions outside right after this session. And again, we have a wonderful team who's here in Gippsland, and they're always available to engage with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carlos. And Carlos is going to be around. Wonderful to have you here over yesterday and today. And so if you do need to have any questions about what's happening on with BlueFloat, Carlos is available. So thank you very much for your time and a great presentation. Appreciate it. Hi, I'm Darren McCubbin, and I'm just the quieter version. Darren's gone off with Minister Bowen, so he's backstage having a very important chat about the future of Gippsland, I believe. So I'm just stepping in with absolutely no notice. The next session that we have, Jules Cole is going to come out and welcome everyone on and introduce us. It's about gender in the new energy sector as well. So please make Jules very, very welcome to the stage.
Thank you. Thanks, folks. We've only got half an hour to talk about this topic. It feels a little unfair, only 30 minutes to talk about gender equality, but I know that this is going to be a really high impact and high value conversation because we've got some exciting experts to talk about not just their own experience, but also some of the exciting initiatives that are happening in the region. So the transition to new energy can be a driver of social change, economic growth and good quality, high-paying jobs in Gippsland. However, we know that these opportunities will likely affect women and men differently. If we don't take planned and deliberate action now and into the future to invest in women, we risk reproducing and reinforcing patterns of inequality rather than reducing them. Women already face persistent gaps in employment, social protection, pay, working conditions, decision-making spaces and overload of care work. How can we better support women's full participation and leadership as we transition to new energy? What are some of the initiatives that are already making a difference in our region? Please make welcome today's panellists, Kate Graham from Gippsland Women's Health, Stella Bodman from Gippsland Women in New Energy Network, and Julia Heslop from Energy Australia. I think we're all a bit full on breakfast, actually, so that was a bit of a slow walk. I'm still digesting those that beautiful breakfast that you hosted today, Stella. So, Kate, let's get started with you. This idea, this concept of a gender-just transition, what is it and why is it important to Gippsland?
Thanks, Jules. Hi, everybody. Gippsland has been built on a highly gendered workforce. So we've had mining, power industries, agriculture, fisheries, forestry, and what that's created is significant entrenched inequality for women across the region, including really disproportionate rates of violence against women and health inequalities. We have really low numbers of women in full-time work in Gippsland, I think about 35% at the moment. We have disproportionately high rates of women in casual and part-time work. And we have very low levels of women in leadership roles in the region. As Jules said, it's critical that we don't replicate the past, that we don't make the same mistakes that we have in the past, and that we take this opportunity to actually be able to embed really sound gender equality practices in our workforces and in our transition.
Thanks, Kate. And Kate, I know there's a project that Gippsland Women's Health is running. I might come back to you on that because I think it's a really good example of a tangible initiative that is being stood up in the region. But Stella, I might go to you, because we have just enjoyed a beautiful breakfast and hosted by Gippsland Women in New Energy. Our transition towards new energy does create a unique opportunity to reshape and disrupt some of the existing norms and practices that disadvantage women in Gippsland. Gippsland Women in New Energy has now over 50 members, is that right? And 200 attendees at the breakfast. How did the network come about, and what are some of the key priorities for the network?
Thanks, Jules. And yes, it was super exciting this morning to have over 200 people packed into one room there at 7:30, bright and early in the morning, by choice, to highlight that women are a priority for some of these organisations that are, coming and developing their projects here in Gippsland. And as Jules said, new energy means a new start for new practices and policies in some of these developers to ensure that women are brought on that new journey. We're trying to do that here in Gippsland, where the transition's happening. So Gippsland Women in New Energy was basically brought about because we wanted a really sort of grassroots network and support opportunity for women in the industry to feel like they have a friend locally in their communities here where they're working, so that it builds momentum and it creates excitement for women in the industry to hopefully help with those retention rates like Kate spoke about, and maybe more women in these leadership roles. So the network so far launched in March this year on International Women's Day. We had 75 roughly at that event, which was also a sellout, which is super exciting. It's grown just like this conference, which is super exciting for the industry. So the ambition for the network is essentially for empowerment for women, celebrating those successes and highlighting that there's already so many inspirational stories from people working in all of our organisations already that might not necessarily have been highlighted, no matter whether you're in a leadership role all the way down to the smaller roles that might seem insignificant but actually have a huge impact on these organisations, and that a lot of them would not be possible without those inherent traits that women bring to organisations. So we really want to highlight that. There's a lot still to come for the network. We're growing and hopefully have some more structured plans in place with some mentorship programs and networks and events, and also connecting in with the other networks in Gippsland as well, to ensure that we're all on the journey together.
Awesome, thanks, Stella. And Julia, you were there at the breakfast, and you're someone who's worked in male-dominated industries for over a decade, including leadership roles at power stations, both here and in the UK. Why are you passionate about gender equality in the energy sector?
Thanks, Jules. And I just wanted to start off by just linking to what Kate was talking about earlier. And the breakfast this morning was amazing, like really amazing. Great job, Stella, and everybody who organised that. And Morgan, who spoke at the breakfast, she was talking about the case for change in terms of gender equality. And there's a really strong case for change around just filling the skills gap, and also around some of those unique leadership qualities that women bring. But the other thing that I feel really strongly about is we know worldwide that women are impacted negatively, disproportionately to the effects of climate change and the energy transition, and yet women are critically underrepresented at those leadership levels. So it's just really important to have this conversation. I know some of you might be sat there thinking, I'm not really sure, should we be talking about this? Why is it important? I think that's a really clear case for change, that the voices that are going to be negatively impacted more are heard, and that linking that to Gippsland, that gendered nature of that historic workforce that Kate talked about, is very, very relevant here. So I think that's really important. And then moving to why I'm passionate about it is my lived experience, you know. And again, a lot of the things Morgan said really resonated with me. And one of the things particularly for me, you know, I've been always in male-dominated environment, like so often first of, only, and that's been very challenging in a lot of ways. But the real challenge for me, I think, has been overcoming that, like, thinly veiled skepticism every time I come somewhere new, sometimes not really veiled at all, you know. And that can be quite exhausting. And so I don't want other women following along behind me to have that same experience. So that's what's really fueled my passion. And I'll push myself outside my comfort zone to do that. You know, sitting on a big stage here, it's pretty scary, but that I feel really passionately about that. I've posted in the questions there's a really cool link to a little video that Mercedes-Benz used in their 2023 International Women's Day campaign. And I'd really encourage you to watch that if you haven't. It's very powerful. It's these young girls, and they're sat in front of camera and they're saying, I don't want to be the first, I want to be one of many. So that would be my real message here today, is let's make the story in Gippsland a story of one of many.
Yeah, I reckon that's a great call to action. Great call to action, although Mercedes-Benz already got that tagline, so we'll have to come up with a Gippsland-specific one. Julia, I'm going to stick with you just for a little bit longer, because we did hear from Morgan Rossiter this morning at today's breakfast that it is important to share our wisdoms and to start telling our own stories. Now, you've undertaken research into the impact of female leadership on the energy transition. What can you share from this research, and why is female leadership in particular important in this space?
Yeah, thanks, Jules. So the first thing that I found really, really interesting in my research was, so I interviewed 21 female leaders across Energy Australia, lots of different roles, different levels, and every single one of those 21 leaders, they had this really, really strong purpose-led motivation in what they were doing. And those purposes were very different. You know, some of them were, I want to help my local community to transition. Some of them were about, you know, I want to be a part of this, you know, basic economic need of delivering energy to people. Some of them were about, I want to be a role model for other females. But that was there with all of those that I spoke to. And I think that harnessing that purpose-led motivation in those female leaders is something that can really bring that leadership into this conversation in Gippsland, that the women empowering other women, you know, that delivering the one of many, and that's across all touch points, you know, the community leaders, like I saw Tracy Lund here earlier from the Morwell Neighbourhood House. What an amazing lady. You know, it's leaders like Tracy, it's leaders like, you know, Jules and people in local government, and it's people like myself in industry. So that's the first point. Second one is around some of those negative impacts that are still there. You know, a lot of, or everybody I spoke to talked about some of those, the bias, the discrimination, you know, some of that darker side of being in a male-dominated industry. And one of the things that I'm really passionate in this space is something called bias interruption. So it's not about, well, let's roll out a bias awareness program. No, it's more about those everyday leadership actions that can challenge some of those ingrained kind of social behaviours, social norms. So things like, you know, having a really strong policy around interruptions during meetings, or really mindful allocation of internal projects or secondments. Things like, you know, some of those everyday little gender backlash type comments like, oh, she's really bossy, or she's not very warm. Well, is that really the case, or, you know, is she just challenging professionally? So those would be two really major take-homes from my research.
And Julie, I just want to say thank you for posting that video from Mercedes-Benz. We actually have a response to it. Just somebody has said, we can be ambassadors by driving a sponsored Mercedes. So I think of Mercedes, if you're listening, I reckon as part of our gender equality journey across Gippsland, let's get a whole stack of Mercedes-Benz and give them to women in all walks of life to drive across the region. Electrified ones, of course, so yeah, that easy, yeah? I am going to go back to you, Stella, now to talk about the network and the insight. So we've got some research insights that Julia's shared from the research that you've done in the region. What are you hearing and learning, Stella, through the incredible connections and conversations that are occurring across the network?
Yeah, so one of the things that stood out to me the most when I first started having a few conversations about the idea of the network was, for me, I'm sort of in, I guess, more of the professional side, and a lot of the people here today probably are. However, there's the on-the-ground workers currently in our energy industry here in Gippsland that are really seeing the brunt of that negativity, and it's something that I wasn't necessarily that exposed to until having some of these conversations with women in the network that are from other industries, and how the challenges they're facing, and how there's bullying in the workplace and discrimination, and there's just awful retention rates because of that. So that's something that really stood out to me, and that was really quite opened up to and interested to understand more about, and how the network can maybe help with that as well, because for me, I haven't necessarily lived that myself. So we really want to try to dig into that side of it, and not just the project teams, but the actual workers on the ground that really face that day to day. So that's one of the key learnings. But on the other side of it, the other key learning I've seen is that I never even thought there would be this many people in Gippsland, women that are in the same space as me, and the same feelings. And once you actually open up and tell someone about your stories and stuff, and have this network, and all the people signing up as members and wanting to have a connection in the network in Gippsland, it's been, inspiring to see that there are already so many good stories and leaders that we just don't even realise, or maybe they're not supported enough in their organisations to actually show those values and strengths. So there's sort of, I guess, two sides to that. The negative side that we want to try to combat, but also that positive side that we really want to try to lift up and show. And so I guess when we do lift those people up that are already doing such amazing things, therefore has a flow-on effect for younger, generations in Gippsland to see what's possible.
And just picking up on that, we do have a question from the audience that I'll just stick with you, Stella. So what messages should we share with young girls to get them interested in renewable energy as opposed to all the other jobs that they could be involved in? So one of the things that I'm hearing, in particular with career advisors in schools, is that when girls and young women are going to get career advice, they're still being directed to childcare and nursing and hair and beauty. So what's the message that we want to give girls and young women about the value of considering the renewable energy workforce as a career of the future?
Yeah, something I'm obviously quite passionate about, because, I'm not that long out of school, and did the Melbourne thing and left Gippsland and went away, and thought that was the path that you had to take, or what all of my teachers, I guess, encouraged me to do. And no regrets, it was great, and got a degree and everything, but it's, unfortunately, COVID brought me back, but it was a blessing in disguise. I never ended up moving back to Melbourne because of the renewable energy industry offering me a job in my hometown, in Yarram. Who would have thought? So it's, I think what would be really beneficial is for each and every one of you to tell your story and go and connect with the younger generation. A lot of these school students are just not exposed to that. They're not going to walk up to one of you and find out how to get involved or find out about what you do. When you're in school, you don't know what you don't know. And so, yeah, none of those things are really taught in schools. They've got, a curriculum but possibly don't have time to fit all of these things in. So I think it's our role to teach them and expose them to what's possible. And a job in renewables is a job for the future. I feel super proud to live in the community where my project's being built. Some might think that's really scary, and yes, you have to talk about it at weekend barbecues and footy events and things, but I feel a sense of pride when I talk about it. So yeah, that would be my call to action, is to go out there and have those conversations with the younger generation and tell them what you do, and yeah, be proud of that.
Julie, I can see you nodding. Is that the same for you? Like,
yeah,
is that the call to action?
Yeah. I'm just thinking, like, if those young girls could hear those 21 inspiring stories that I heard when I was doing my research, and I genuinely found it really inspiring, every single one had this really amazing story to tell about what their purpose was in life and how what they were doing aligned with that. So I think that's something that we can really do, is to get some of those purpose-led stories out there, and young girls can hear that, and it would inspire them to come into the industry. You're going to be part of something that's going to shape the future. How amazing is that?
And I think that's a really strong message, that we can be part of solutions for our region. And there's all different types of roles that we can play within that. So we can, they can be highly skilled trade and technical roles. They can be leadership roles. They can be community engagement roles. They can be, finance and administrative roles, and research and development roles as well. So there's a place for girls and women along that whole continuum. Kate, I'm going to come to you, because we mentioned that there's a project that Gippsland Women's Health is leading, but there's a question that I know you're passionate about, that has been posted in Hoover. The question is, what are the structural changes that we expect the new energy industry to implement? For example, parental leave provisions, incentives for women in leadership positions, more part-time positions. Now, I know Gippsland Women's Health has in thinking about energy transition, has done some work to consider what needs to change structurally in the new energy industry.
Thanks, Jules, and thanks for the question. Can I firstly, Stella, I like your call to action. Can I be really clear that this transition is not just about how do we get women into new energy. This is about what does this mean for our community, and what does it mean for women, girls and gender diverse people in Gippsland. Beyond feasibility licences, beyond announcements about batteries and all the other exciting things that happen, this is about what does this mean for our community and for our women. There does need to be structural change, but there needs to be cultural change. And that requires men at the table with women in making this cultural change. Agree, Julia, so much with what you said around bias interruption. How do we make their cultural changes? People continue to seem to be afraid to talk about gender equality, gender inequality, gendered violence, whether it's at home, in the community or in the workplace. And as I said, we have disproportionately high rates of violence against women and gender diverse people in Gippsland. Some of the structural changes, I think, sometimes feel overwhelming for organisations and industry. They actually don't need to be. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit that I think we can manage. Things like sexual reproductive health leave for women. Really important and actually really easy to do, and does not really impact the bottom line of an organisation at all. You have women that are being supported. Your organisational profitability will increase significantly, particularly if you have more women in leadership. Your reputation will improve, your creativity and innovation will improve. I was talking recently with a group of small and medium enterprise in the region and they raised the issue around safety in the workplace for women. And when you've got a male-dominated industry and you've got a tea room where conversations of really inappropriate conversations continue to happen, women don't feel safe in that environment. They're structural changes that we can make, but they're also cultural changes.
And Kate, that call to action around let's make this a whole of community transition. So so there is, new energy creates opportunities within our workforce's employment and economic opportunities, but the social change and the cultural change that you spoke about is equally as important, because it might not just be about the jobs creation, it's about women's safety within the Gippsland community more broadly. So I think there's another message there that we would love to see the new energy sector pick up and help create safe communities for women as well.
And absolutely, Jules, and I think I absolutely believe the industry have a responsibility to ensure, they have a corporate social responsibility to ensure the impact on our region is managed appropriately. And as I said, we cannot afford to replicate the past. When we spend $320 million a year just in Gippsland on responding to family violence, we've got an issue.
And I think that just, really addresses the question here around how can some of our proponents that are not based in Gippsland actually support Gippslanders in achieving, gender equality? I think that's part of the challenge too, is that it's not just about the jobs creation. It's about when you come into the region, take that social corporate responsibility, think about the gendered natured history of Gippsland, and try and influence cultural change as well. So seek to better understand. Now, Kate, you do have a project. Gippsland Women's Health does have a project that's being funded by government. Can you tell us a little bit about that project?
Yeah. Can I just quickly respond though, Jules? The reality is women aren't going to take over the world in our lifetime. But this is about how women and men work together to create a better society for all of us, whether it's at home or work or at play. We were fortunate to receive funding from the Victorian Government Office for Women for a Women in New Energy grant. And I just want to make a note, and I'm not sure if Jane's here or not, or John, but to acknowledge Jobs Bank collaborating with us on the evaluation component of that project. The project really is about inviting industry to work with us to build their confidence and capacity and capability in terms of gender equality in the workplace. I guess, it's a bit of a worn term now, but we see this as a workforce ecosystem project. It's not just about how do we get more women into new energy, how do you retain them and advance them in your organisations as well. So it's about us developing a suite of contemporary policy and procedures. A lot of organisations don't know where to start with this. It feels overwhelming. They're not sure what to do. It's actually, it's our bread and butter. We don't see it as that difficult, and this project is about supporting industry working collaboratively to do that, to create those resources. It also has a leadership mentoring component of it as well, so hopefully we have women like Julia who will be able to be mentors through this project with other women entering the industry. So it's a really exciting project for us.
Yeah, fantastic. And Kate, I'm assuming that if people are interested, they can reach out to Gippsland Women's Health, connect with you. Yeah, that's awesome. Hey, we've got a couple of minutes left, and I know we're going to get a wind up pretty soon. So, Stella, fast forward, 2035. If we are successful in this journey, what does good look like?
Great question, and I think it probably comes back to Kate's point around a whole of community impact. And so, we do have, opportunities just, at our fingertips for young women to, become a norm to be in these industries, and to it being spoken about as options and ideas along the list of hairdresser and school teacher and nurse. So I think, there's still a long way to go. And as Kate said, you know, there's some pretty horrific statistics here in Gippsland around women's health. So, and I think Kate shared a statistic at our first event that, you know, it's going to take, correct me if I'm wrong, let's just say a long time until we see and you know, a gender equal society. So if we can take one step as an industry to be a part of that and be a leader in this space, you know, I think that would be amazing by 2030 here in Gippsland, and really be a leader in not just new energy, but yeah, equality and diversification as well. So yeah, oh, and also to have turbines in the ocean.
Yeah,
maybe.
And that's a beautiful future to aspire to. Julia, I've got a 10-year-old daughter, and I've also got a 10-year-old son. I've got twins. So imagine they're sitting out there in the audience. What's the key message that you would like to give to both of them? So, you know, we talk about young people and inspiring young people now. What would you say to them right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I've got a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old girl as well. And yeah, I think for me, like the one of many message is like a really powerful one. And one of the lines in that, you know, the girls are saying, I don't want to be the first. I don't want to have to be exceptional. I want to be one of many. So I think it's that, yeah, like we can all do whatever we want to do, and whatever that thing is, you know, what's your passion, and you go for it. And that's, you know, that's a message for everyone, really powerful message. And I think this, you know, what we're talking about with the energy transition, it's a big step change. And I think, you know, I'd like to be able to say to the kids, you know, that time for change is now, and they're going to be a really big part of that.
Yeah, fantastic. And I'll take that message home to them as well, so thank you. Kate, a gender-just transition, is it possible? Can we do this in Gippsland in the next 10 years? Can we do this by 2035?
That's a hard question, Jules.
I know, but,
yeah.
You know.
And Stella, 130 years to achieve gender equality at this rate. Yeah. I would like to think that we could, but I think I would be over-optimistic. What I would like is to see the change from making women responsible to it being a whole of community responsibility. So when we talk about, you know, the pressure that we put on young women to enter STEM, right? We hear it all of the time. What pressure are we putting on young men to enter workforces that are traditionally highly feminised? We don't hear that at all. We actually need to swing that pendulum and change the narrative a little. What I guess my call to action would be to try and get some way to 2035 would be that new energy industry entering this community work with our community to achieve some form of improved equality for women, girls and gender diverse people in the region.
See, folks, I told you that 30 minutes would not be enough for this panel discussion, but unfortunately we need to leave it there. Please join me in thanking Kate Graham, Julia Heslop and Stella Bodman for their amazing insights, and please connect with them in the foyer. I think you all are hanging around for a little bit, because I know that the audience will have much more questions. So thank you very much for joining this conversation, folks.
Thank you, Jules. Thank you very much. They've done a great job. So, and thank you to the panellists as well. Everyone, I'd like to move on to our next speaker here today, and thank you very much for being with us. The next talk is a very controversial subject in some regards, and one that we're very glad that we as a conference are participating in. The topic is called Pick Your Poison, Navigating a Secure, Clean Energy Transition. And I'd like to welcome to the stage the GHD's advisory practice, from GHD, I'm terribly sorry, I'd like to welcome onto the stage Andrew Harris. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I apologise for competing with lunch, and I was never going to win that one. So hopefully I give you some food for thought, and then you can go and eat real food afterwards. So my name's Andrew Harris. I look after our little national security and critical infrastructure advisory practice at GHD. And I'd just like to, whoops, I've done something to this. Press the wrong button here. Bear with me 1 second, please. Thank you. So I'd just like to acknowledge, I'd like to recognise the Welcome to Country that was made yesterday. I wasn't here, but I believe Auntie Christine did so. Excellent. Thank you for that. And I'd like to just acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in which we're meeting and on which I've done a lot of the work that I'll be talking to you about today, and to pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. So today, excellent, the right one, I'm here to talk to you about how to make decisions that, yes, perhaps controversial. I wouldn't say controversial, I'd say informed decisions about making sure that the energy infrastructure that you put in place is as secure as possible. Because if you understand the environment in which you're operating, you can mitigate against the threats that you face. So I'm going to go through three main sections: where the vulnerabilities are, what we think about in Australia and in the US as well, and then also how we at GHD tend to think about threat and vulnerability. So I tend to wear the tinfoil hat so other people don't have to. That's my sort of professional role, to come up with all the reasons you should worry about stuff. And one of the big things that I like to do is explain to people that security is a community responsibility. But you don't have to believe me, you can believe the Director General of ASIO, who very helpfully said that very recently, that security needs to be a shared responsibility, not a niche concern or something left to the specialists. And that was this year. So consider that. It's not about understanding what all the threats are, it's about doing something about what you do understand. So once you understand what the issues are, you can think about what that shared responsibility might actually look like. And actually, it's a whole of society shared responsibility. And it's not just about energy security, it's not just about water security, it's about all the critical infrastructure that we rely on. And you'll see me referring to the Department of Home Affairs produced material a few times in this presentation, because they've just done such a great job with this world-leading legislation, and it really is world-leading, called the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act. And with that legislation, they've produced all this brilliant schematic diagrams and that kind of thing. So that diagram shows how all the water and energy and transport and whatever sectors are all interconnected, and that was on the front cover of this presentation too. I wanted to just contextualize this talk within other work that we've been doing, me and the team that do these projects. So in 2021, we looked at water treatment, chemicals, supply chain resilience. In 2022, we looked at energy sector, emerging threats to the energy grid. And in 2023 and 2024, we've been helping the federal government work out how to fill the gap left by the lack of a merchant navy in Australia. So all of these things interact to make our society functional, secure and resilient. In terms of the energy grid, I'm glad these slides look good when they're blown up, because I didn't quite realise how large they were going to be. So I should note that the designer of these excellent slides is a Gippsland local. And I should have put in my quick plug for Gippsland, which is my favourite part of Victoria. Walkerville South's a bit far away from here, but it's a great holiday spot, and I really love Gippsland, and I believe your butter and cream are calorie-free, so I'll be taking them home. Back to Melbourne. So when you think about the grid, particularly in Victoria, it's complicated. Ownership's complicated, operations complicated, balancing load is complicated, and the politics around energy are complicated. There are vulnerabilities throughout the grid, and I'm not going to go into great detail, people can pick what they are, but the point is you've got to think of it as a set of interconnected systems where in between them there are issues. And ownership and control is one of the main concerns. So again, back to Home Affairs. very helpful, and that really does look good on a big screen. If the power goes down, what happens? Well, a lot of stuff happens, and living in regional Victoria, I'm sure a lot of people know that the generator kicks in, runs out of fuel, whatever happens, but there's a cascading set of problems that happen when the power goes out. First order effects, second order effects, third order effects, but eventually everything just collapses. So we rely on power as a society. So we have to look at what happens when the power goes out to understand why we should worry about keeping it secure and not just building it up, and not just considering the energy transition in and of itself as a goal, but also taking the opportunity to do it better. So Sonia, the wonderful designer who's based near Darnham, she's come up with this excellent, it's got some nice animation in it as well. So think about it not just as the grid that you rely on, but the sort of grid that you have in your own home. So if you are generating power, or if you just have lots of load, like high load devices connected to the internet, you have your own set of special and exciting problems to worry about. But the less you have connected to the internet, in theory, the less you have to worry about in this context. So there are very many things that we came up with here that are connected to the internet, but above all, you have your inverter. So think about that, and think about what would happen if these devices were unreliable, or if they were compromised, or where the data's going, and that kind of thing. This is a simpler illustration of the same point, but effectively it's saying, you know, if each of us in our own homes is a separate vulnerability that's connected into particularly a renewable energy grid, where we're all feeding into and taking out of the grid at once. So therefore, all our internet-connected loads, particularly larger ones, could in aggregate provide some sort of destabilization and some sort of vulnerability for the right threat actor. Everything that kind of keeps you warm or cool, fed, online, connected, can also have other kinds of purposes. So again, I say I put my tinfoil hat on, but I'm very careful to use examples. The work that we did for the federal government, we can't actually talk about in great detail, which probably doesn't surprise you. These graphics have been drawn from those reports, but they don't contain any of the sensitive stuff. But in the US, fortunately, the Idaho National Labs just came out with a report to back me up, so I'm going to go through a bit of that after this slide. But officially, if you look at the sort of public ASIO advice, public Home Affairs advice, and other things that are out there, what we're worried about in Australia are things that can be compromised from the internet. Number one, whatever's visible can be seen and broken. And foreign ownership of infrastructure, foreign ownership of supply chains, where is the cloud that you're relying on actually physically located? What are the obligations of the people operating it to the government under which they operate? Those kinds of issues. And just simply supply chain concentration. We rely very heavily on, like everyone else on Earth, on supply chains coming from one particular part of the world. So again, I mentioned that the Idaho National Lab in the US, which is their leading renewable energy lab, came up with a report that allows me to go into some of the analogous kinds of issues that we dealt with, but that they've put out publicly. So they do things like actually test devices, and they really red team is what we call it in the industry, but they do penetration testing for all of these devices. And they've come out with this public report, and I'm very grateful for it, and I was sent it, and so I'm going to go through a few slides. But think about these in context of what we have in our own context. So this will be a very common contrast for people in this part of Victoria. Large spinning things that create energy, and then diffuse, large spinning things that maybe even would have had a locally manufactured component, or at least were made in perhaps countries like the US and the UK, and then large distributed systems that are made largely in China. And that's effectively, in one slide, what the energy transition sort of looks like. And I just thought that was a poignant one to share. And that sort of splits off how we then think about these problems. So on the left, this is Idaho National Lab's sort of consideration of what the issues are at the outset. So again, supply chain concentration and the potential presence of adversarial entities involved in the supply chain. But they don't think it's unfixable, they think it's quite fixable, and that it's about inspection, assessment, standards, that kind of thing. It's about regulation and it's about configuration. Point is, we have a choice, and that's what I wanted to make very clear here, is that it's not inevitable, nothing is inevitable. No one else, there's no shadow government in charge of the decisions we make in Australia, and we can do what we need to do to make the most secure energy transition possible. Back to the inverters. So when I was writing this report for the federal government, I had all sorts of weird issues with my inverter, and I wondered if it was a coincidence, and I'm sure it was. My inverter is a Solar Edge, for full disclosure, and that control centre and none of its technical support, none of it is really here or accessible. And when it broke, it had to be just kind of swapped out with a new one, and there was no understanding of what the problem was. And that is related to these issues that they found in the US with these inverters, which are largely related to security, internet-facing security measures. It doesn't matter specifically the technical nature of these. It's more, even if you have your multi-factor authentication and you have your passwords really strong, and sometimes they can have inbuilt vulnerabilities, either accidentally or potentially deliberately. It's hard to know. The point is, a lot of them are controlled offshore. And you've got to think about that, like in aggregate, what is the fleet of inverters that we have in a given location, and the control centre's not here and we can't access it, government has no connection to it. So then the sort of idea is we should regulate. We should just regulate. In Australia, we love to regulate. In Victoria, we especially love to regulate. But the issue is, who do you regulate? And in the US, where they struggle to regulate almost anything at the moment, they have sort of done away with this idea of regulation because, who are you even going to regulate, or are you going to regulate everyone? And I thought this was a relevant slide to this context because someone buys the site, someone invests, someone supplies. It's just like a big public-private partnership. How does it work? But despite the complexity, it's an urgent transition to make. The climate's not suddenly saying, oh, we'll leave you alone while you sort things out. This is just an example of the kinds of things that have happened in the US, and just in dollar terms what they cost. Climate-related disasters. And the reason that dollar amounts are relevant is because sometimes people justify putting in insecure systems by saying they're too expensive. But if you look at the cost of these things, you could have justified putting in a more secure system to begin with. And then you would build the supply chains for those things. Now, one of the really controversial, this is probably controversial because it hasn't necessarily been proven in an Australian context, but it has been proven in an American context, is that you can remotely ignite a battery if you know what you're doing. And there is public information on this, and there is not so public information on this, but this is public information. All these big batteries we're building, they're great, but once you have a fire propagating among the cells in the battery, it's very difficult to control. But if you set up your battery to have the right kind of thermal regulation and inbuilt, and I'm not an electrical engineer, inbuilt safety measures, you can mitigate a lot of these risks. But the fundamental risk is, who is it connected to and who owns it and who's built it. So you've got to be able to trust your supply chain when you're putting in such a big problem into your community, which is also a massive opportunity. People think it's inevitable because globalization has taught us that when things are really cheap and freely available and we can just get another one when we need it, that we should just do it because why not? But it's just the situation we find ourselves in, and with all the geopolitical tension around the world, not just in our region, we've got a situation where it's not as cheap as it once was, it's not as available as it once was in some cases. And in reality, we have all the critical minerals we need here. We've got a lot of, and I'm not just talking about building solar panels, I'm talking about batteries. You know, we can do that here, but it's a matter of political will and community decision and that kind of thing. Arguably, we're in a post-globalization universe, but I'm sure there's someone with more of an economics background in here who can speak to that. But the point is that the same issues we found are the same issues they're finding in the US. And these points, which were their summary points, and that graphic, which is their helpful sort of like Terminator alternative future graphic, they're kind of saying you can make a choice. Like there's supply chain concentration. We don't have control over offshore supply chains, but we can choose who we buy things from, what we make, what's important. But it all comes down to knowing what the vulnerabilities are and what you're protecting, which is what I'm going to get to in the third part of this, and I promise not to run out of time. So also, not just in the US and Australia, all over the place. So EVs, big interesting problem as well. I heard someone in government, and I won't mention who or where or what, say to me, I'd never buy a Tesla, I'd never buy a Tesla. I've just heard all this stuff about a Tesla. Now, it's not about Tesla. It's about understanding how much control you have over the thing you buy, whether it's a Tesla or a Volvo or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. So in Korea, I just saw this the other week, that they have South Korea, they're having this issue with, they don't really understand the risk of battery fires in EVs in underground car parks. So instead, they're just banning underground car parking for EVs. Now, that's not helpful to anyone, and it will damage confidence in the overall transition to EVs. So you have to manage these issues strategically. So having sort of maybe put you on a bit of a downer, because that last panel was quite upbeat, I'm going to try to bring it up a level and empower you with some ideas and ways of thinking. And I did just spend 2 days at a big national security conference in Sydney that convinced everybody that we're all going to die, but the only thing we could do was make the right choices to avoid it. So here we are. So what you've got to do is think about what is a material risk. And again, Home Affairs, very helpful. All this material's online. It doesn't look as good as this, but it's online. And it's about what kind of risks are actually consequential to the services that you rely on. So maybe if my home solar array in suburban Melbourne goes down, nothing really happens. But if my home solar array in an isolated part of Victoria goes down and there's no backup, then it's a big problem for me. But if my local hospital can no longer receive power, it's a serious problem. Same for water utilities. So it's about what is actually going to impact the delivery of the service you need. And in the case of the energy grid, there are multiple vulnerabilities, as I spoke about before. But to sum it up, things that have a negative impact where you can minimize that impact, even if you can't directly reduce the risk. So if you've got backup, if you've got a generator that works but you can't stop the power going down in the first place, you've mitigated the risk so far as is reasonably practical. So this is Home Affairs' definition of what a material risk is in the legislation, which would apply to a power generator in certain contexts, which you'll see on the next slide. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but it's there and it's very clear and easy to understand. So a critical energy asset is something that services 100,000 people or has, and I'm going to read it here, and generators and storage greater than or equal to 30 megawatts. But the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act is relevant regardless, because these four hazards of physical, personnel, supply chain, cyber and information, they're relevant to any security context, and that's why I like to use them. And again, it comes from Home Affairs, not from me, so take it up with them if you don't like it, but I like it. But our take on it is you have all these complex interdependencies between those four hazards, and the way we like to think of it, whether we're talking to an energy utility or a water utility or a federal government agency or whatever it is, it's about knowing what you're protecting, which is at the bottom there, and how you can reduce vulnerabilities through minimizing interactions with the outside world effectively. So this is another way of thinking about it as an onion skins and layers, but it's also about thinking where do you have the most understanding, where do you have the least understanding. So people don't get their supply chains much, but they understand how to put a lock on their gate. So if you don't have a lock on the gate, put a lock on the gate. But don't worry about like reaching deep into your supply chain if you can't do it. That's what this means. But it's, you know, it's necessarily a little bit more complex, but that's the main point. Here we get to the interesting part. So this conference is particularly interesting for me because you're bringing together community, you're bringing together suppliers, government at all levels, and investors and operators, and effectively the whole supply chain is here, and the end users. The people who are most affected when it works or when it doesn't work are the community. So sometimes the community feels like it has no agency over these massive, big geopolitical problems or shortages, or, you know, it was IV bags recently. You know, apparently cat influenza vaccines are in extremely short supply. There's not much you can do about that. But what you can do is go home, think about what in your house is dependent on energy and how often it's gone out and what you can do to prepare. And people in the country get it really well. People in the city do not get it. And when payment systems went down in Melbourne not long ago, I always carry cash because of the kind of work I do. I was able to pay for breakfast and no one else was. And I was just shocked. Like, there's people in their 20s who've never even touched cash, I suspect. I'm no longer in my 20s, you might notice. The point is, it's not just about your house, it's about your community. If you're building a community battery, what are you doing to make sure it's secure, that you understand it, that you know where it's coming from, you know where it's operated from? And the minister earlier made some big announcements. All of those projects will end up having these similar considerations applied to them. But at the end of the day, it's the community and the community authority and the social license that will uphold good security of your energy infrastructure. So look, that is the substance of the presentation today. And I was hoping that perhaps there would be some questions. I don't know if there are any questions, but we've got a few minutes. There are questions. Okay, excellent. And again, thank you for sticking with me despite possibly low blood sugar levels. I did eat a couple of beautiful scones before.
We have some questions. Well, we have one question. Refreshing.
Well, I should say that it was called Pick Your Poison because, that's not the question, but it's called Pick Your Poison because whatever you do, you're going to create a problem for yourself. It's just about understanding what the problem is and how you're going to deal with it.
Hasn't popped up.
Yeah, there might not be a question. So I don't know if anyone wants to yell out a question or anything, but I'm around. My email address is there. I should be around for a couple more hours at least. I'm very passionate about these issues and very happy to talk you through them. It is a scary world out there. It's getting scarier, but at the end of the day, all you can do is make the next best decision. So thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
There was a question around the Infrastructure Act and the legislation around that.
What was the question?
What was the question? Who had that one?
Was there anyone in the room?
Gone to get a scone. All right.
Well, I would just say, just Google it, Security of Critical Infrastructure Act, or SOCI Act, and you can read about it. It's actually extremely good. It doesn't have very strong penalties, which is it's probably its main problem, but it's clear, it's actionable, and it helps. So, yeah, go for it. So yes, good point. So, but that's more about not reporting an incident and other things. But when it comes to actually having what's called a critical infrastructure risk management program in place, the penalties for not doing that aren't necessarily too severe. But the penalties for not reporting a critical incident, like Toll didn't report when the national medical stockpile was compromised, which is on the public record. We do have a lot of traction when it comes to using those examples. And Home Affairs has been trotting out DP World, which is the big port operator, as the example of what not to do and then what to do. So companies have been able to redeem themselves in incident response. But then, yes, we use those examples to say, well, like I was talking about the dollar amounts before, reputation is extremely valuable. So if you can put reputation on the risk register as a potential consequential impact of failing at something, then boards take it very seriously, and helpfully the Act mandates that you get board level endorsement for your risk mitigation program. So yes, that is a very helpful mechanism, and nobody wants to go to jail, least of all directors of large companies. So yeah, does that answer your question? Yeah. So we did this with a water utility in Central Coast, which is also on the public record. The water and sewer, it's called water and sewer. It's their owned treatment and water treatment and distribution asset. It's essentially about you have to build trust in the organisation so that people start to talk about what the problems really are, a kind of psychological safety. But then you also need that proper threat intelligence, sometimes from the dark recesses of government, which is my job a lot of the time. And then you need to massage that all together and work out who's responsible for what in the organisation, and capture a risk register that people can action and maintain, and then develop a works program to mitigate all of these vulnerabilities they found, which are everything from making sure you've got that little O-ring that you forgot that you needed to have a spare for that critical pump that will stop the hospital getting its water supply, which cost 50 cents 20 years ago but is now impossible to find. That's one thing. Or making sure the cyanide you use to treat your water is actually locked up. You know, these are the kinds of things that came out, but then it's also when you're talking to your suppliers, having enough. So you're talking about supply chain. ASIO puts out this thing called the Security Manager's Guide for Supply Chains, I think, and it has contractual clauses that you can apply. So you don't actually have, you know, I'm happy to talk to you about this afterwards. I'm not going anywhere. I'm hard to escape. So yeah, it's complicated, and that's why it's hard to do, because it's expensive and time consuming, but it's a very clear process. Good, all right. Any more for any more?
Just one about sort of inverters and they're getting more widely used in the industry. Do we have any examples of inverter-based resources being compromised?
I can't tell you what I can't tell you, but there are examples. Idaho National Labs and others have shown that they can be compromised. In Australia, it's an emerging issue. We've been more concerned in Australia about like kind of grid level compromise, not necessarily inverters, but that was one of the subjects of the report that we did. And it's a subject of ongoing conversation, and it needs to be tested, and it needs to be demonstrated in a public-facing forum that this is a problem so that people can believe it, because I just sound like I'm insane saying that your home inverter could kill you sort of thing. It's not quite what I'm saying, but look, to answer that more fulsomely, like when you're looking at a risk like that, you look at the capability and the intent, and the capability is quite high to simultaneously compromise a fleet of the same inverters and then perhaps switch on and off the load fast enough that you then cause massive battery fires. But I mean, if you were smart about it and it was the right sort of weather conditions and it was the AFL Grand Final and there was, you know, certainly strategically located inverters that were going to bring down the transport system through a series of cascading effects. I mean, that's the kind of thing that, you know, in another context and at the conference I was at earlier this week, they call hybrid warfare. Like, it's the same thing. I wasn't going to use that word here because I thought it was a bit too sort of tinfoil hat, but it's not. If you look at what happened, and I'll stop, somebody has to stop me, but before Russia invaded Ukraine 2 years ago, the first thing they did was attack the grid remotely. And the only reason it wasn't worse is because they had manual circuit breakers. And these days, people are building fully automated substations, fully automated power stations. Why would you do that? Like, oh, it's off. Like, I mean, you know, so, and I was talking to someone, one of my colleagues before, about automated dam infrastructure, which is also another thing to be concerned about. So, but I should underline that if you can come to terms with the catastrophic impact of not dealing with these things, then you may actually do something positive about them. Again, happy to talk after, yeah. So yeah, be alert and be optimistic and be alarmed. So that's probably the message. Thank you very much, everyone.